Check 1, 2. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me out there? What's going on, Joel? I see you out there. Yeah, you got the fiber going now, so hopefully it's going to be good for a call in, bro. That's cool, man. And yeah, we want to have a good discussion today. I have to start a little early because I got some things to do later on, but I want to definitely talk about consciousness, free will, morality, skepticism, epistemology, physicalism, idealism, non-dualism, dualism, all that good stuff. Hopefully somebody can call in and share their ideas or challenge mine. And of course, it's real easy to forget what a person's views are or what the arguments really are. I've kind of noticed that. So I'll kind of break it down. For me, I'm ultimately agnostic about all these views. Pretty much, I just compare models and I have beliefs about which models are stronger than others. And then I talk about the stronger models and why they're stronger. So I kind of look at this like, say, certain idealistic versions versus certain physicalist versions, right? And I compare those kind of models. I'm more leaning towards idealism as far as what seems to make more sense metaphysically and logically and all of that. But I could be wrong about that. I think strong emergence is something that's kind of a hand wave to explain how consciousness is generated by matter, like the matter of the brain. I see something like emergence as just the output of a relation. So I kind of see things as bottoming out to the essence of reality, which is going to be just a relational structure. That's how things are defined by their dependencies and so forth. So causation really isn't fundamental to my view. And I think it's pretty much well established that causation is not in the language of science. It's mainly in the language of philosophy. It's the story that we tell about relations. It's how we talk about relations in nature and things like that. So, I think it's good to start with, epistemic standards. How did I get to that view? How do people get to their views? Are there good ways? Are there bad ways? I mean, it depends on what a person values. And I can only explain what I value as virtuous when it comes to examining particular claims, right? So for me, it's going to fall into 4 virtues. So I start with my epistemic standard. The 4 things that I consider are like, empirical adequacy. Like, does it respect what we actually observe and intersubjectively? Not just my own subjective experience, but everyone's sort of corroboration on facts of the world empirically. Does it respect that? Then we have explanatory power. Does it help explain the phenomena that we care about, that we're talking about? Does it actually explain it? Parsimony. Does it avoid unnecessary metaphysical assumptions? Right? I mean, there's always going to be an assumption and possibly a few assumptions, but they may be necessary. I'm talking about avoiding unnecessary metaphysical assumptions. That way, there's less points of failure in the model. And then we have internal and external coherence. Like, does it make sense internally within its framework? And does it fit reasonably well with established knowledge about, the intersubjective appearance of the world? Does it add up, right? So I want to make an important distinction as well. Like, I'm not claiming that a worldview is true simply because it satisfies those virtues. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that these are reasonable criteria for comparing competing metaphysical interpretations. Okay? So, many people are physicalists, and they'll say that they're physicalists because it's more parsimonious than idealism, for example, right? Because they may say something like, we already have overwhelming evidence for a physical world governed by physical laws. Physical simply takes that successful theology seriously and says that everything that exists is ultimately physical. So I guess the argument, the way I understand most people's view of physicalism, the argue for it, say something like, look, we observe brains, bodies, matter, energy, physical interactions. Neuroscience finds correlations between brain states and consciousness states. We can manipulate consciousness by manipulating the brain. The physical theories successfully explain enormous amounts of observable behavior. Therefore, postulating a fundamental consciousness or experiential reality in addition to the physical reality appears unnecessary. Don't multiply these fundamental kinds of stuff beyond what is needed. So from that perspective, physicalism looks parsimonious, because it has really one ontological category, physical, and everything emerges from physical. Now, some forms of idealism appear to say, consciousness and mind gets to the physical world. Then you have individual minds plus external world. So a physicalist can therefore say, why add consciousness as fundamental when physical processes already seem sufficient? It's a good question. But for me, there's already a weakness in the argument. The phrase physical reality is really concealing a huge amount of theoretical baggage here. Physicalism doesn't merely posit like one thing. It generally needs to account for physical entities, those laws that they talk about, the mathematical structure, the appearance of space-time, causal relations, distinctions that we call information. Then there's the subjective experience of all of this stuff, the intentionality, the apparent unification of consciousness, and the relationship between physical states and phenomenal states. And this kind of raises, for me anyways, a crucial question. Does reducing the number of fundamental substances actually make a theory more parsimonious if the remaining substance has enormous unexplained properties? And that's where my critique, I think, gets its strength from. Let's talk about the hard problem. The hard problem is a challenge to physicalist parsimony. The hard problem of consciousness is a thing that materialism created. It was an observation or an acknowledgement that a purely physical accounting for does not explain first-person experience. How does third-person storytelling equate or explain first-person subjectivity? Because physicalism is saying that consciousness, subjectivity, is ultimately produced by physical processes. So why should physical processes have subjective experiences at all? That's the question. And so physics would tell us such things like mass, charge, spin, fields, energy, relationships, behaviors under physical laws, but none of those descriptions obviously contain qualia, or what it feels like to see red, experience pain, taste coffee, to be aware of the differences between these experiences. So the physicalist kind of faces something like, does physical description equal subjective experience, or explain it? And this is why philosophers like David Chalmers argue that the problem isn't simply explaining, how process information works, brain processes that information and how that works. It's explaining why those processes are accompanied by experience at all. And for now, this may not be a scientific question. It may kind of be an impossible question on a naturalistic methodology, right? And Joel says, Scott, what about asking ourselves, do I need to accept a conclusion? Now, yeah, I laid that out at the beginning. I don't, like I said, I don't ultimately conclude anything. All I can do is really just compare the models. And we have a standard, and I went over the epistemic standard that we can use as a reference, those 4 virtues, and then we can compare those in reference to those virtues and see which model actually comes out on top. Now, obviously, that's subjective. My virtues are based on what I accept are virtuous, right? Not everyone thinks that parsimony is important. Not everybody's going to think that explanatory power is important, or that it should be internally and externally consistent with itself. Not everybody sees it that way, but I do. And so if I, and I think a lot of people may agree with me on those virtues. If they do, then now we have a basis to compare, right? We have something we all agree with, the standard. And then we can take those standards and look at each of those models to see about explanatory power, parsimony, and so forth. But as far as needing to accept the conclusion, no one needs to do that. Actually, the most parsimonious worldview is saying, I don't know, agnosticism in that sense, that I don't know what the answer is either way. That's the most parsimonious view, because you're not actually offering anything, any sort of assumption. You're just saying, I'm not convinced one way or the other to know it's true. That's what it is. So, a physicalist could say, well, I have one fundamental ontology, therefore I'm more parsimonious. And one could respond and say, well, only if the one ontology actually explains the phenomena without introducing additional unexplained principles. Like, for example, imagine like theory A, one fundamental entity, but it requires 3 unexplained bridges. Say like you've got physical reality, then you've got information, cognition, subjective experience. Theory B is like there's one fundamental experiential reality from which physical structure emerges. So if theory B can explain physical appearances without requiring an entirely separate ontological category of experience, then theory B may arguably be more parsimonious, despite sounding less parsimonious at face value. This is something called explanatory parsimony versus ontological parsimony, right? So idealism, let's get into that. So idealism can make a very interesting parsimony argument if you're not familiar. A sophisticated idealist, they're not going to necessarily need to say something like, well, there's this giant supernatural mind that creates everything. that's actually a much harder position to defend. So like instead, the idealist could begin with something much more modest, right? And say, look, experience is undeniable, whereas the mind independent physical world is an inference from experience. So we directly encounter experiences, perceptions, thoughts, sensation, our awareness of all that. But then we infer things like electrons, quarks, field, space-time, all the descriptions. So therefore, the idealist would argue, why make the inferred description metaphysically fundamental while treating the thing actually given in experience as something that somehow emerges from it? That would be my question. So I'll bring Joel on. What's going on, Joel?
Hey, Scott. I'm actually munching on my breakfast right now, but
oh, I just got done with mine, man.
Yeah.
Cool. Any thoughts on that? Like, say, I'm not saying you're a physicalist, but let's pretend you were. And let's say you were challenging idealism. And I made the statement, look, Joel, why make the inferred description metaphysically fundamental while treating the thing actually given in experience as something that somehow emerges from experience or from it, from the physical world? Like, how do we get from third person description to first person subjectivity, maybe?
Well, I guess the most important. Hold on. Let's see if I can get my sound coming through clearer. The most important distinction I would want to make right away was that a physicalist doesn't believe that their descriptions are the fundamental thing. The descriptions just describe, right? That our descriptions are always going to be subjective in their ontology. They're always going to rely on us as thinking creatures in order to, make descriptions of things, right? So it's not our descriptions don't exist if we don't exist. If you're a physicalist and you think about, if everything with a mind, died off, in some kind of mass extinction, then there wouldn't be any descriptions left, but there could still be a physical world left behind that's absent any subjects. So does that make sense? That's a misstatement of physicalism to say that the description is the ontological fundamental thing?
Well, it could be. I had a debate last night with a couple of physicalists. I think Leophilus was the guy's name. I don't know if you know who he is, but he told me straight up that, on physicalism, the descriptions are the ontology. It's just that we describe it in words. So he's saying, by saying that ontology is the same as the description is correct. And he says that you're mistaking the words. He's trying to tell me that, he says, your confusion is you're trying to say that the words mean the thing that you're describing. No, the description is the thing that is the real thing, because that's the only thing we have is a description. So,
well, I don't know the guy. I don't know the guy. I can't defend what he's saying. But I would just say that, chances are you're not really talking about physicalism when you're saying that my description as a mental thing is the fundamental thing. You're talking about you're putting something that's in a mental category as the fundamental thing. That's not physicalism. But I'd be curious to push back on the person who holds the view to see, what it is they're trying to say and why they think it still qualifies as physicalism. I don't know how useful it is for you and me to have that argument about someone's position when they're not here. But that would still be my answer to you, is that anybody who's saying the description is the fundamental thing is confusing the description for what it describes. They're confusing the map for the place. And that's a very easy thing to do, especially in the midst of conversations. But conceptually, we want to kind of differentiate those things.
Okay, so you're saying that the people who like to say stuff like the description is the same as the ontology are not true physicalists.
If they are explicitly saying that their descriptions as mental objects are the thing that is fundamental, I would say that can't qualify as physicalism, because they're putting a mental thing as the fundamental ontological substance. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I would immediately need to ask. I would need clarification. I would need to know how that person was saying, like, my description, like the thing that I just came, like I looked at something, I saw what it was like, and then I put it into words, and that's the description. Like, how could you not view that as something that depended on you? You had to exist in order for the description to exist as a consequence. So to me, putting anybody who's putting a description forward as the fundamental substance can't
I
be
agree
thinking
with you.
clearly, because a description is something, as far as we know, everything that we mean when we say a description is something that seems to depend on something else. So it can't be fundamental. It has to be dependent.
I would agree with you. Now, the other guy that I can't remember his name, he chimed in on that, and he says basically the description is the fundamental ontology rather than some consciousness, because he said the reason that's the case is because there is no such thing as consciousness. He said that basically what you're calling consciousness as this supernatural experiential qualia thing is not that at all. That's your illusion. And he says basically the mind is physical. It's just physical stuff observing more physical stuff. So he says when the physical describes, that's what it is. It's describing ontology, more physical stuff. So it all leads to physicalism. That's what they were trying to tell me, is that my assumption going in was faulty, that I haven't established. He said, you haven't established that consciousness is not physical. You're just assuming that this thing called subjectivity is actually first person. That's not really the case. That it basically what you're calling consciousness and qualia is just a word to sort of explain away what's physically happening in the world. It's just a different happening. And so I think that's how they just, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but that's pretty much what, and I've heard this before. It's not like I'm unfamiliar with that argument. So I think that's the difference maybe that they would like to make, is that, well, Joel, no, the description is the ontology, because the mind and consciousness and thinking and all this is physical. It's all physical.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I'm looking at, and I'm not being able to make sense of. I understand the idea of physicalism as everything being physical, including, you know, ourselves as consciousnesses, having experiences, and other mental things, whether they be thoughts or feelings or whatever. What I'm saying is all of that could be true, but the description still comes from the thinking subject. Even if the thinking subject is a thing that is based in physical foundations, it still is a thing that has to exist in order for there to be that description. And so the description can't be the fundamental thing. Even in a physical world where we could say, and we could point at the fundamental physical thing, and we could describe the physical thing. There's the physical thing that is fundamental, and then there's our description of that physical thing. And that has got to be several steps downstream, ontologically speaking, where first you have an ontological, fundamental physical substance, then you have things forming out of it, whether they be subjects or objects. And then from those subjects, you get descriptions of the experiences that they have. And of course, I mean, to me, that just seems obvious. You know, that's one of those things where you just say, hey, if we're talking about your thoughts, could they be fundamental to you? No, you have to be fundamental to your thoughts. There's no way it can go in the other direction.
Now, you could be a dualist, physicalist, like a property dualist. And in that case, I would imagine the physicalist would say, as a property dualist, they would say, look, the description of red isn't the ontological reality. There is an underlying physical state of the world that causes the experience and supports our description of it. So they would say that, yeah, there's this mental thing going on that's representing reality. And they represent it as physical. And that's what the world is. It's the way you experience. You experience physical stuff. And you experience causation. You know, point A hits point B, and then point B leads to point C. That's how reality works logically. There's no way around it. No way around it. And they'd say that, you know, they're parsing out but I think these guys were not dualists. They were I think identity. It sounded like identity. I didn't really ask, so I can't really say that. But so it just really depends on how you're getting at that. Now, you know, for me, the deeper interest is what exactly counts as the underlying ontology. Suppose like a physicalist were to say, well, the brain is ultimately a configuration of matter and energy, right? So I would ask, well, what makes matter and energy the ontological reality rather than a particular theoretical description that we observe? Because physics gives us a lot of mathematical descriptions involving, like, you know, the fields, the particle, the quantum states, the space-time, all that good stuff. But see, the physicalist is going to make a further metaphysical move when they say, well, these descriptions either are what reality fundamentally is, or they refer, you know, depending on the flavor of physicalist you are. But in either case, the conclusion isn't simply contained in the measurements themselves. That's the problem. You know, this really connects directly to the physicalism versus idealism argument, or dualism versus non-dualism. You know, number one, I'm having an experience of something. Two, this experience correlates with all the brain activity, which can be described in terms of, I don't know, neurons, electrical potentials, whatever. And then metaphysical interpretations of that are the third thing. Therefore, the neural physical description describes the ultimate nature of reality. So the first two can be extraordinarily well supported through science without automatically establishing the third, right?
No,
And that's where I'm
yeah,
going to challenge.
I think the third is impossible on any model.
Yes, it is. Yes. Yes.
So,
Yes.
so that's why I tend to think that a softer view of physicalism is the more appropriate view. That doesn't have to make claims about everything. It just has to say, of the things that I'm convinced of.
Oh yeah, like I always say this all the time, Joel. I'm a physicalist. I am a physicalist to a certain point. Like, which really doesn't make a lot of sense, because physicalism is defined as all the way down as physical. But just as a colloquial thing, I'll say,
but that's why I think this softer version of it is worth carving out. It's okay to say, hey, I'm convinced of what I think I have good reasons to be convinced of, and then I stop short of that. And the things that I am convinced of include physical objects, but I don't need to posit that something is, fundamental to all of existence.
I think we're closer. I think we're very close in our ideas there on that.
Right, but I think that I heard you say something about, how we can have experiences, and we think we can say that the thing that we're experiencing is fundamental ontologically. And I mean,
The
I think that's the
problems,
thing
yeah.
that kind of perked up my ears, is because like we don't look at things and just recognize, oh, okay, now we're at the fundamental level. Now this can't be there can't possibly be anything behind this. You know, that's not something we're going to be able to just look at and see about something.
Right. Yeah, you're not going to, like I say, I don't think that inferences alone or even direct experience alone is going to prove anything one way or the other on that, right? And also too, every framework, every theory or model is not going to explain its premises within the model itself. So you're going to always be able to step outside and say, well, how do you justify your assumptions going in? That's with every single model in the world. Like everything is based on at least one assumption, and you can always question that assumption. And even if you answer that assumption with another framework, then that framework has an assumption that needs to be explained as well, and it just goes on infinitum like that.
And I have plenty of assumptions within my worldview. I have basic beliefs, I have axioms, or whatever you want to call them, but none of them are about what's fundamental ontologically to reality. That's one that I just look at and I go, I don't need that one in order to have a coherent worldview. So that's why I brought up earlier the question of, do I need it? I think there are all kinds of things that we have to accept in order to deal with reality. There are all kinds of things that we have to take as basic beliefs or starting assumptions or axioms or whatever you want to call them. We need them in order to operate. But this one about idealism, or that harder sense of physicalism, aren't necessary. And then, like you said, when it comes to the way that you consider yourself a physicalist, or describe your thinking and your behavior as physicalist, is probably very close to what I mean by physicalism in its softer sense. Although, I tend to go with that.
Could we call it just methodological physicalism?
Well, you can certainly coin that, and kind of make it. I mean, to me, what I agree that what you're talking about is about the way you operate, right? You got to think about these physical objects. You got to, treat them like they're important. Whatever your view of their ontological status is, you've got to engage with them, and that's your method for living life. I guess my thing includes that for sure, as I think anybody who lives life must have to do that. But it goes beyond that to say, like, what am I convinced of? What categories does it include? And for me, the things I'm convinced of really only includes the category of physical things, or things that I suspect are ontologically dependent on physical things. So some of those things I think are kind of obvious, and some of them I think are understandably harder to pin down, like consciousness is notoriously difficult.
Well, one of the reasons I would reject like that strong version of physicalism, like I can go ahead and say, yeah, I'm a methodological or a soft physicalist, fine, because I negotiate with the world, I take it seriously, I do call it real. But one of the tough things about the really strong physicalist view has to do with what constitutes properties. Like, to say that, on the strong view, they're going to say that reality is ultimately material or physical, right? And what I've kind of learned through just researching more about science, like physical science, like what physical scientists have learned about the physical world is that the physical is instantiated by relations. That, you know, a property is never standalone. So material properties can't exist on their own standalone. They are what they are because they depend on other things. They're instantiated by that relation. So in other words, like if you take billiard balls, there's, you know, in a billiard, you know, we all know if one ball hits another into the pocket or whatever the case is. But
I can't hear you anymore.
oh, is that any better?
That was it.
Okay, cool. I was just going to say that within each billiard ball, there is no principle of causation that comes with everything. Like this sort of principle that, you know, inside the ball is the probabilities of everything that can happen as it relates to other things. No, the relations exist between that ball and the other billiard ball. So that means that the relations aren't the physical things or the matter at all. It's more like a condition. It's a conditional feature of reality that everything sort of boils down to. So that kind of, for me, throws the hard form of physicalism into question, because no material thing is standalone at all. It all depends on other factors.
Well, okay. I'm trying to follow that. I thought I was in agreement when you were talking about properties needing, you know, not being standalone, and I was going to chime in and say that I see it as, you know, a property is something about an object, right? So if for any property to exist, the object that it's a property of has to exist. And but I certainly agree that like relationships are unavoidable. Like if you have any kind of existence, then you're going to have relationships with the thing or things that exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you just picture kind of like an empty space, and then we say, okay, now there's, you know, we're going to put two rocks, and we're going to immediately be able to say this one's to the left or the right of that one, or, you know, any number of other relational things.
It stops becoming a thing without the relations. Like think about an electron. Like what makes an electron an electron?
But let me finish the analogy just for a second, Scott. If we had two things on an empty space, and we just kind of said, well, look, the relationship between this one is that, like, you know, the red ball is on the right and the blue ball is on the left, you know, and that's the relationship. If we remove either one of those objects, then the relationship changes. If we really stipulate that we're taking one of them out of existence, then I think the relationship between those things also ceases to exist. So I think it's fair to say that relationships, like properties, or maybe even that they are a kind of property of an object, although I think it's worth saying they're a different category than the properties that are in and of the thing itself. But I think in the same way, they depend on the object ontologically. The object has to exist in order for the property to exist, in order for the thing to have relationships with other things.
But the object is a property. That's the problem.
How do you know? How are we establishing that the object is a property?
Because, like, I was going to say, like, an electron is an object, right? But if you were to list out all the properties of that object, you would list out charge, mass, spin, position, momentum, all those things, right? But these properties aren't meaningful in complete isolation. They are defined partly through the relationships, right? So like charge would determine, you know, how the electromagnetic fields may interact, or mass determines how it would respond to the forces or whatever. And the spin would determine how it relates to the measurements and the quantum systems. So the position is position relative to another position. Momentum is defined relative to a reference frame. So
Yeah,
I
and
would ask,
that's what I'm
what
saying
is an electron
if you,
apart from those properties?
yeah, right, and that's what I'm saying is if you could somehow isolate an electron in a pocket reality, and you say in this reality nothing exists except for this single electron, well, it wouldn't have those relational properties that you're talking about. Whatever it was that makes it an electron, to the extent that we can stipulate that it's there, wouldn't be those things. It would have to be something else.
Are you saying that matter has properties and they enter into relations? Is that what you mean?
Well, I'm saying that anything, it seems that all objects have some kind of properties. And any real object is going to have relational properties because it's going to have, we're going to be able to say something about any real object in relation to some other real object. And a lot of times that is how we make sense of the world. You know, it's kind of like if I was trying to tell you how to get to somewhere you've never been before, and I said, oh, well, you know where you have been before, and I say, just go past that and you'll get there, right? So, I mean, that's kind of how there's nothing wrong with the idea that when it comes to describing things in reality, we describe them using their relational properties that they have in relation to other objects. It doesn't mean that the relations are what's ontologically fundamental. It just means that in order for a thing to exist, it's going to have relational properties.
Well, for me, I just think that you're not going to have objects or properties of the objects because without relations, that's just a brute fact. Like a simplistic picture would be something like, well,
I was agreeing with
is,
that. I was agreeing with that. I was just saying the relationships
gotcha.
aren't fundamental. They don't precede the object. But I'm saying in order for an object to be real, it's gonna have relational properties. Just like the two, when we were doing the thought experiment where, you know, we can think about one ball all by itself existing. As soon as we imagine that there's another ball that exists, we're going to be able to say, well, what's the relationship between those two things? Just by virtue of existing in the same reality, they're going to have a relationship with each other.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And you know, even relations can bottom out. You can bottom out farther from relations all the way down to probability states. That maybe that's even more fundamental to the relationships that that sort of instantiate those states of being, right? It could be that probabilities, and again, this still challenges physicalism because, again, to get back to like the core problem, physicalists want to say that all there is, you know, matter and energy. And you might ask, well, what is matter? And they're going to tell you, well, mass, charge, spin, you know, the science textbook. And then I'm going to ask, well, what are mass, charge, and spin? And then ultimately physics is going to give you the mathematical structures describing how the quantities behave and interact. So the fundamental physical description starts looking less like, you know, stuff with intrinsic qualities, and it looks more like a mathematically structured network of properties, interactions, symmetries, relationships, really. So this motivates ontic structural realism for me, which is the philosophical position that structures or relations may be more fundamental than the objects and the properties that consist or make them up, because that's how they exist, through the relations of those properties. So my argument isn't that matter doesn't exist. That's not really what I'm saying. My position is matter may be real at the level of ordinary objects we describe, while not being metaphysically fundamental or standalone. You know, it's dependent.
Well, and I think everyone is comfortable with the idea that like the objects that we interact with, like on our level, like when we pick up something and hold it in our hand, isn't an ontologically fundamental thing. It's an object that depends on the certain arrangement that it has. Now, whether or not the ultimate ontological substance is a physical one or a mental one or some other weird third category, I think we can agree that when we're holding any physical object in our hand, it does have some physical substance. It can be broken down into smaller physical parts. That we can show. All right. But we've never been able to show that any physical substance is dependent on any other kind of substance. Now, that doesn't mean it's not the case. It doesn't mean we can say it can't happen. It may be that we are incapable of making that assessment. You know, that like it's like the limitations of science that people are often kind of pointing at. Just because science is the most reliable method for reaching conclusions doesn't mean that it's helpful in every area. And you know, it could be the case that we just, you know, we're unable to recognize when we get to the point where a physical substance in turn depends on something mental. But all I'm saying is that we can show that physical objects depend on their physical substances, and we can't do that in the other direction.
You said can't do that with what? You tailored
We
off
can't.
again.
You can't show that any object is dependent on a mental substance in the way that you can show that a physical object is made up of a physical substance.
Yeah, and I just reject the whole idea of substance. I don't think.
Well, but that's what I was saying is if I'm holding an object in my hand, you're saying no, it's not made of smaller physical parts.
No, it's constituted by the relationships between all the parts that make that up, like the mass, spin, charge, and all that. So
Wait.
without any of those properties, that thing would not be the thing in question anymore.
All right. So wait, you're saying, you know, if we started off with some concrete and we poured it, you know, into a mold, made ourselves a, you know, little statue, and we said, well, what is this made of? And I was like, it's made of that concrete, right? And you said, no, it's these relationships between all these things. And I'm saying, well, the concrete is the stuff that has all those relationships. It's the thing that we formed into this particular statue that makes it what it is. And I'm saying that that's the case for any physical object. I mean, obviously different processes to get to it. You know, but for, you know, like the microphone that you're holding in your hand is definitely made up of a bunch of smaller parts that have been assembled. Well, each one of those parts is made up of some kind of raw material. Those materials are physical. They had to be made into, you know, specific shapes and then put together to make that, right? So I'm not saying that, you know, the plastic and the metal and whatever else that's made of are fundamental ontological substances of reality, in that they don't have anything that they are in turn dependent on. What I'm saying is the existence of your microphone depends on its material components, parts, substances. Now, you're not denying that those things exist, are you?
Nope.
Right. Well, so that's what I'm saying is to the extent that we can show that anything is fundamental in that way, of like this object depends on its substance, we're always going to be demonstrating physical substances, where nobody has ever demonstrated a mental substance or a comparable relationship where an object depends on a mental thing.
Yeah. I think substances is kind of like I don't want to say it's invalid or anything like that, but the assumption of substances is kind of outdated anyways, at least within science and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like,
Well,
at
it
least
can't.
when it comes to, and I don't mean like science of Newtonian physics or anything like that. I'm talking about like the deeper theoretical type of ideas. So
In that case, you're not really refuting what I'm saying, Scott, because
nope, I'm not.
I'm talking about at that higher level where we are most comfortable in operating, and we can
Right,
reach out
right,
and
right, right.
pick up any object. If we can take that object apart, we're going to be making smaller physical pieces of something
Yep,
until
you'll
we get
be
to the point
doing
until we get to the
reductive
point where we
science.
can't
Right, you
anymore,
get the
right?
reductive.
Well,
Yeah, and it's
so
all holds real. Yeah, it's
so
all
you can
real.
point when you point to like something much deeper fundamentally, you know, it's not refuting what I'm saying to say, hey,
Right,
here at this level, you can't take it apart and find a physical substance, because that wasn't what I was
right,
saying to
right,
begin
right,
with. I
right,
was
right.
saying that where we can do this, in the areas of reality where we can do this is what we find, and this is what's fundamental. It doesn't tell us that's the answer everywhere else, but it becomes more of a stretch to posit some other kind of answer other than the one that you've already got working for you at the level that you're most comfortable understanding.
And look, we can talk about how physicalists would, like, substance dualists, people like that, though, that brand of physicalism, I can't put them all under one umbrella, and I wouldn't want to, but they would say that, they would say something like, well, the brain is a physical substance and consciousness is a property or a state produced by that substance. But consciousness itself doesn't obviously behave like a substance. You don't encounter a consciousness in the same way that you encounter a physical object. You simply encounter an appearance of seeing, hearing, feeling, like a field of awareness. And what would the substance of consciousness therefore be? Someone
Well,
would
I
say, well,
think on the
consciousness
physicalist,
is yeah, I would just say that, if they ask, well, then what is it made of?
it's not made of anything. It's a product. so
Right.
so look,
It's
when
the
when
proper.
when a car drives down the street, when the engine makes it go, what is that movement made of? Is the movement made of the engine? Is it made of the gasoline? Is it made of the entire
Oh,
automobile?
yeah.
No, it's not. The movement from one place to another is the product and the effect of an operating automobile, right? But to say that the automobile is the substance of the locomotion is getting it wrong. And in my mind, there's what's comparable here is, from a physicalist viewpoint, the mental experience of being a subject is not something that has it doesn't have a substance. It's just the product of a brain working properly, in the same way that a car working properly can produce a locomotion. But neither one of the products is going to be actually made the um, of the thing that's making it, in the way that a wall of bricks is made up of bricks, or a brick is made of mud, or mud is made of these different kinds of chemical compounds, or whatever, and so on and so on.
Well, one could argue that, unlike movement, which can sort of be reduced, like physically reducible, consciousness may present like a different problem than that. Like, the question isn't like, can we describe what the brain does when someone is conscious? We clearly can, but the harder question is, why does any of that physical activity have an associated subjective experience at all. Like, we can talk about movement. Well, the reason why movement happens is we could tell the story about the engine and all the parts and how they interplay and react. But with something like consciousness or experience, there's nothing about physical activity or computation or any of the ways you want to describe it that's going to give you a conscious experience in theory.
No,
You know,
well,
it's
now
still
you
kind of
say
an
that.
open question.
I was going to say,
For
you
now.
say that.
For
You
now.
phrase it one way, and then you phrase it a lot more carefully. The truth is, you don't know, right? You don't know what it takes.
Yeah.
We don't
But
know what it takes. We could say, well, what does it take to create locomotion? You know, if we want to get down the road, what kind of thing does it take? And we could say, well, we kind of know what kind of things it takes. When it comes to consciousness, we would just have to say, we still don't know, right? We've got some ideas that we're working on.
Right. So
We're doing our best to figure that out. But we can't say that. But we can't say that. We can't say that physical things can't produce consciousness, because that's not on the table yet. That hasn't been. Oh, okay.
I didn't say that. I asked the question. I said, why does any of that physical activity have to be associated with a subjective experience at all? That's the question I asked. Like, with movement, we can reduce it to all the parts of the engine, all the things that happen. But with conscious experience, I'm just making the statement, it's a bit of a different problem. Because why is there something it is like to experience any of these processes? That's all I'm asking. I'm not saying.
But remember that what I was bringing.
We
were talking about substance. We were talking about substances, and you were asking, on a physicalist view, what would the substance of a mind or of a consciousness be? And I was just saying, on a physicalist view, it's a little like asking, what is the substance of the locomotion that the car is having? It wasn't to say that they are, analogous in every way, and it wasn't to say that,
or in any way. It's a totally different.
Well, it's analogous in the way that I'm bringing it to you, which is to say that in the same way that the locomotion isn't made up of the car parts or the engine parts, it's not made up of the activity of the engine when it's running. It's a different thing. You don't say the car traveled from, Ohio to Cincinnati. What is that trip made of? And then go and take that trip apart and find that it's made up of something, right? The locomotion isn't something that we can take apart and find out what it's made of. Like, we can take apart a brick wall and find out that it's made of bricks. That's what I'm saying. And I'm saying that on a physicalist view of consciousness, the same thing. Consciousness isn't something you can take apart and find out what its substance is. If it is the product of a working brain, then it is similar to the locomotion of the car, not something that is produced that you can then say, okay, let's take this thing that's been produced and see what it's made of. If we could, we probably would have settled, the question, what is consciousness, a long time ago. If it was an object that we could dissect and study on a table in front of everyone, right? This would have been a settled issue a long time ago. It's because it's not that we don't have those easy answers.
Well, I would just push back only because I've talked to so many physicalists. They would just probably want to correct you really bad there. Because,
well, I don't agree with every physicalist, but I don't think I'm saying anything about physicalism that's not true. I don't think any physicalist is going to say consciousness is an object that we can dissect together, you and me. And if they do, yeah, bring them on. Let's talk to them. I'll tell them how ridiculous that sounds to me.
That's exactly the kind of stuff I want to debate with them about, because that's what they always
understand.
Like the debate last night. I was saying that, what is consciousness made of then? And they were saying it's made of neurons. That's literally what consciousness is made of, your neurons. I'm like, so you can tell me conscious weighs? And they're like, yeah, it weighs exactly that your brain weighs. Your brain weighs what, a pound? That's how much your consciousness weighs. That's how they view it.
Well,
They look at
is
like
that?
it is the brain is your consciousness is
Yeah,
what
they're
your
one and the
brain is
same. I
doing.
get it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's a term. I'm trying to remember if it's like if it's called identity theory, where they're saying that for instance, like the feeling of pain is the nerve fibers in your body firing off. It is that's what it is. When people are like, hey, when I'm feeling it up here in my head, what is it? And they're like, that's what it is, and it's one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean,
Yep.
what I'm saying as a soft physicalist is I can't say that that's all that's going on. I can just say that's what people are able to show. To the extent that there could be that as well as something else going on, they can only posit that. And when you ask, well, how would you show it? They go, oh, well, we can never show anything. Well, we were able to show that C fibers were involved in the pain. We can't say, again, I'm taking a soft position. I can't say nothing else is involved, but I can say this physical thing is involved because I can see it firing off, right? So I think that's the important line in the sand that I draw with those things. Obviously, I don't want to be tied down to every crazy thing that every physicalist on the internet is saying to you. I know you talk to a lot of people, and I'm sure some of them are frustrating.
Yeah, and some of them
But
have another argument. I don't know if you go along with this one, but another kind of physicalist is what you call the eliminativist. And so they would like to say that there is no consciousness. That's just how we talk about what the brain's doing. That
or there is
actually,
no pain. There's only nerve fibers.
right.
Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so
Yeah.
they would say that, that's not real at all. You're
And that
so
goes up to and includes the idea of a conscious self, right? That they would that
mhm.
an eliminativist would say, oh no, that's also something that doesn't exist. And I tend to be, I think, right in line with you when I say that like there has to be a conscious self in order for you to be having that kind of even if you were to say, well, you're making some kind of mistake in interpreting your experience, okay, well then there has to be a me making the mistake. um, it's kind of weird to think about like all of what makes up an internal, like every one of us thinking about ourselves and then thinking, well, like what if that was just a bunch of meat inside of my head, squirting salt. you know um
Mm-hmm.
it is a really weird idea, but I mean, like it's I still think it's the best one we have on the table because it's still the only one that we can really point to and say, look, we don't know what else might be going on, but we can say this is going on.
Yeah, like I say, I don't have a problem with the physical. I don't have a problem with consciousness being dependent on the brain or the body or the earth or all the things that constitute me being here. I don't have a problem with acknowledging all of that at all. I just leave it to the fact that, well, that's just an inference that works to a certain point. And at another point, we have to think about it if we're interested to do that, by the way. At a certain point, we have to start thinking what other sort of explanations work, because this intuitive, relational, relative, everyday Newtonian physics kind of explanation works, but only to a certain point. And then if we're interested in asking more about that, then we can kind of acknowledge that, well, some of our intuitions about our experiential reality don't really hold up. We start talking about things like free will, morality, because it seems intuitively that I'm a causal agent. It seems like if I sit down and deliberate long enough, I can decide to get up and do something, right? And if I get up and do that thing, then it seems that I deliberated and I was a causal agent in that whole process, right? But then as philosophers and even neuroscientists drill down on, they start calling into question things like free will and objective morality because of that. And so these things start becoming questionable. And one could say, well, I don't see why you should do that, because it seems like in my everyday experience, I exercise free will. I do what's right, and I'm glad I do. So what is all this nonsense about no free will, no morality, anything like that? It's just a way of drilling down to what level of layer of reality we're really talking about. But hey Nelly, how you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Hey, now.
Sorry, I'm late. I accidentally thought it said 11, and so I was like, "Oh, it's starting now." But no, you said 10.
No
You
problem.
said 10. So, what have you and Joel been discussing?
All right, so we've been talking about free will, or I'm sorry, we've been talking about consciousness.
No. We've been talking about that same old ontology stuff that we always
Yeah, the
talk
ontology
about.
stuff, physicalism versus idealism. Now, Nelly, you've been working on a model, and I don't know if you're, like you believe it or not. I know you've worked it out, and it's really interesting. It kind of seems similar to integrated idealism, things like that.
Mhm.
But do you want to talk about, because we were talking about how, and it's really kind of tricky to talk about it without potentially straw manning people, because
Mhm.
I can talk about physicalism. I think you were there last night when I was kind of going at it with Leophilus, and I think you were too. And they were on Robin's channel last night. And Leophilus was pretty much making the point that, well, physicalism is the most parsimonious view because it's all you observe.
Mhm.
Consciousness really doesn't. Consciousness is the physical stuff. It's just a way of talking about the same thing. There is no, separate consciousness thing. It's basically just the brain doing what the brain does.
Mhm.
And there's nothing more to it than that.
Mhm. Well, see, I'd say I don't, believe my own model, because I try to separate from what I actually know, which is not much, really. It's like I try to remain humbly agnostic, while also, though, I don't try to be a passive agnostic, though. I want to dig into all these different, models and see what they have to offer, and see if one of them has better, explanatory power, is more likely, which I haven't really found. I feel like physicalism, idealism, panpsychism, my own model, they all have, strengths and weaknesses. And, so I try to um, keep what I know separate and what I find more attractive. Like, what I find attractive is the idea of the physical and mental both being fundamental, but that's just my aesthetic that I like, and it could be completely wrong. So,
And when you say fundamental, you mean like a metaphysical reduction base, or do you mean like the God's eye view?
I'd say the former.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of do too. Like, how entanglement is considered a fundamental thing, but it doesn't exist everywhere. Kind of like gravity. Like whenever you have mass and you have the right conditions, you'll gravity appears to you. But it doesn't mean that gravity just disappears. It's always going to be a fundamental property. It's just that it depends on relations. So for me, I'm kind of looking at consciousness kind of in the same kind of way. Like, it's something that arises when conditions are met. And that would make the relations more fundamental if we were to try to put it into a conceptual hierarchy. But I also understand that conceptual hierarchies are just for us. They're not for reality itself. Like, as far as I'm concerned, time, causation, all that stuff may not even be something I should accept. I probably reject all that at that level of discussion because of everything we know. now about, the theory of relativity, quantum mechanics, and causation. So I would say that it all sort of arises at the same time.
Yeah, and I would say that, it's not like my agnosticism is set in stone either. It's like, if physicalism is able to produce, falsifiable, experiments, and are able to pinpoint a mechanism explaining how a first person perspective arises, and they're able to completely explain the how, then to me that would make me embrace physicalism again. Just like but the opposite is true. If there is still nothing, after, the physicalists say, we just need more time, we need the technology, when it gets there we can do these tests. Like, if that time comes and the tests produce nothing, then that's going to sway me towards more of, consciousness first, perhaps is more likely.
Yep. I just wonder how they can run such a test. I know there's clever people that can do it. But I know some things, and I did that video the other day and got so much heat from one guy about it.
Yeah.
Hey Dave, how you doing?
I mean, and I don't know about
go ahead.
I was like, I know, and I don't know, Joel's take on that. It's just, me personally, I'm a person with a lot of time on their hands. I'm pretty patient. I'm willing to give physicalists, the benefit of the doubt of, hey, you said that if we, we test these hypotheses, something will show up.
But we don't want them to keep working on it, Neil. We don't want that. We want that to go away. No, I'm just kidding.
And sure, if all these hypotheses end up failing, the physicalists can just say, oh, well, we just needed to do more testing. But it's like, you can only, like, realistically, there's only so many possibilities. It's like you're constantly moving the goalposts. It's like,
like that episode I saw with Neil deGrasse Tyson and David Chalmers, and David Chalmers said, yeah, we're working on getting the right, computation together to test it and to do it. And Neil deGrasse Tyson said, wait a minute. Back in the 50s, it was the Turing test. And if only you can pass the Turing test, then we know we've achieved consciousness with a machine. When we've done that like a million times over, now it's like, well, that's not good enough. We need this other thing. Then that other thing was met. And then you guys are still not satisfied. Like, what are you really waiting on? Like, like,
I mean,
David said, the problem is, says you have to understand, consciousness is so mysterious of a thing that we don't want to move too quick. Like, we come up with these ideas, but we kind of put them out there knowing that we'll probably never meet that goal. But then somehow clever people make sure we do meet the goal. But we don't want to still give it to them because somehow we're just not convinced.
And to be fair to the phys.
Sorry to butt in here. I was just going to say, I think this is a great example of how when, like at some point in the past, something seems, impossible. And then later on, the technology has gotten there. A lot of times looking back, we kind of tend to say, okay, well, the problems that we're up against right now, the things that we don't understand right now, they're really different and special compared to all the problems that have been solved in the past, all of the things that used to be mysteries to us, and now we understand them. And I mean, I think this thing with the Turing test, I mean, I could have a misunderstanding, but the Turing test at the time, the idea was when we have a computer that someone could talk to it and it would convince the person that it was a perfect, like without knowing, like you're just like on the phone or something. And you can't tell the difference. You can't tell that you're talking to a computer. Well, at that point, we'll have to say, man, these things are conscious. they ought to be treated with some kind of consideration in that way. But here we are at the point in history where every single one of us has a computer in our pocket that can talk to us in that kind of convincing way. And so now we're looking at it and going, well, okay, it still seems too premature to say that they're conscious and deserve that kind of consideration, right? Well, why is that? Well, that's because Turing, even though he was a genius, was looking forward at a problem that hadn't been solved, and we, as just lay people, are just looking back at something that's already been figured out just within the last however many years. And so that's why it seems that way to us, right? Now, I think there's obviously other things that we ought to be trying to figure out when it comes to, if you care whether a computer could become conscious, you've got to come up with something else other than, can it fool you into thinking that it is? Because obviously it can.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. And I think what it is I think there's some sort of incredulity at play that a lot of people don't want to maybe admit to sometimes, because it's almost like a form of human exceptionalism. Like we think we're conscious because we're special somehow. So we're very slow to grant animals consciousness. It took forever for us to think of dogs and cats as conscious, and eventually we did. And so like we're starting to grow in our acceptance of what sort of creatures beyond ourselves could be conscious, because this brings up a lot of ethical questions, like about farming and eating meat, stuff like that. And those are difficult questions for some people. They don't want to have that sort of moral dilemma. So now about computers being conscious, well, that brings up ethical questions about slavery, and are we hurting the computer's feelings, when we keep asking it to do our work and stuff like that. And some people find this just incredulous, like this is just ridiculous. But a lot of other researchers do think that our AI systems are already conscious, because they're hard physicalists. It's like, look, we already know that all consciousness is computation in the brain. So if we can just mimic what the brain is doing with neural networks, then it just follows that our computers will be conscious, because we already know that that's what produces consciousness. So they do that in the AI systems, and lo and behold, it talks, it answers questions, it mimics, it fools you. You don't know if you're really, Richard Dawkins, thinks that his Claudia is conscious, for example. And this is a very smart, brilliant person. So maybe we're the ones that aren't really smart. We're the ones that are the doubting Tom. In actuality, we already have consciousness with our systems. I don't know how we could ever know that, though. Like, how could we test?
I don't have any problem with the idea that somebody out there knows more about this than I do. I think what I would say is, oh shoot, I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, no, as I said, we're lay people looking at it, and there may be somebody who understands it better. I'd be interested to hear, their argument. But to me, the idea that, if we can get a computer to do some kind of computation, that we can train it, to spit out an output that is like something that a person would say, something that a human being would say. We've spent a lot of time and effort into building something that can mimic a human, and we've spent zero time building something that actually produces consciousness, and really thinks and feels, right? Because we didn't go at it from a what's going on physically to create this, and how closely can we mimic this? Although I'm sure there are projects like that going on, where people are trying to build synthetic brains that really really mirror what's happening in a brain. But a computer is not it. right? A computer was not built for that. It wasn't made to mimic what's actually going on physically inside of a brain. It's meant to produce results, you know, with, you know, that are similar to what brains produce, which to me is just a different thing. And that's why I don't suspect that there's any actual consciousness going on. But I mean, the shit part of this is, if it was going on, there'd be no way for us to tell. You know, it's just like the problem with philosophical zombies.
Yes,
you know,
that's what I'm
problem of
saying.
hard solipsism.
Right.
Well, yeah, but yeah.
This is kind of the angle I get at, like with the debating the guy. That's kind of what I'm getting at, is that they're making all these claims that they know exactly how consciousness is done and why it's there and how it's there, and they pretty much think that the problem has been solved. If you talk to them, they seem like there is no problem. The hard problem is just something you created because you want to have doubt. It's like, no, materialists actually came up with the hard problem of consciousness, because that's where it's a hard problem. And they're like, well, we reject the hard problem of consciousness. We already know how consciousness is created in the brain and blah, blah, blah. We're very confident on that. Let's move on. But at the same time, they can never reproduce consciousness in a system.
Well, who's trying to do that?
Well, there was a research program last year where they tried to mimic the consciousness of a fruit fly, and so they mapped out all the neurons and the connectome of the fruit fly onto a simulation. And by running various tests, they concluded that while it acts kind of like a fruit fly in the simulation, it doesn't really have any experience. And they tested it by, you know, I don't know, some of the ways that they tested the actual fruit fly, like tempted it towards food or energy or something like that. And in the simulation, it didn't work. So they're like saying, oh, so it doesn't really have an awareness like the real fruit fly does. And so they kind of say that we didn't really produce consciousness, even though we mapped out the entire connectome. So there's a little bit of a mystery still there about how do we get this simulation of the fruit fly to be just as aware of its surroundings as the real fruit fly. But the question is,
maybe we still have a ways to go when it comes to doing that. I'd have to look and see, you know, what it was they were doing, and you know, I have no doubt that it'd be.
Yeah, that's right. But so to say that we already know how to create consciousness, or we already know how consciousness is created, you know, and all of this stuff, I just am skeptical about that claim, that it's maybe a little too strong of a claim. I think for now we don't. I think I can safely say for now we don't. Will we in the future? I hope so. Maybe we will. That'd be really exciting. But for right now, we shouldn't say that, oh, we already know that idealism is true, or we already know that physicalism, that the brain is, or we know how to create consciousness, or whatever the claims are to support it. I think that's a little too strong. But I want to also get to some of these comments in the live, because it seems like everybody wants to talk about free will and morality.
Okay.
And I'm happy to talk about those things.
Although I did want to, before we move on,
go right ahead.
From consciousness, I wanted to know what you thought, you know, of Anil Seth's reframing, where he basically says that we're like the hard problem is the wrong way of looking at it, and the real problem is the mapping, predicting, and controlling the specific biological neuromechanisms that generate, you know, distinct conscious states. Like, do you think that that's, you know, a legitimate way of looking at it, or do you think he's like trying to dodge the hard problem?
I think Anil Seth is stronger in the neuroscience than he is with the philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of seen that with his debate with Bernardo Kastrup, and I also saw him debate with the other guy, the panpsychist guy. What's his name? That wrote the book.
Philip Goff.
Philip Goff. Yeah, Goff. And it seems like his thing was like, well, I don't know about all that. You know, it seems like he sort of didn't really close the whatever he was trying to claim.
Mhm.
It just ended up like, well, I think the most we can say is that we don't know there for something. But Bernardo Kastrup says, well, we're not claiming that we know anything.
Mhm.
You know, we're just we're analyzing the problem and
Mhm.
we're pointing out the issues with your view compared to our view. You know, and
Mhm.
I think it just turned out, well, it's just underdetermined. But I think everybody agrees with that. I think that's just trivially true.
Oh yeah, and I mean, I'd say I agree with Seth when he says that we should stop searching for a magical solution to the hard problem.
Oh yeah, I do agree with that. Yeah, I've heard him say that, and I do think the hard problem is kind of a an impossible problem they set up for themselves because it's already premised on we should be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
But who said that?
I mean, to me,
and I think to me that's part of the misframing that comes from people who are not physicalists. No one is saying we should be able to do that.
Mhm.
The hard problem is that everyone is recognizing that you just can't. It's kind of like, and I've brought this up before. The reason that you can't is the same reason you can't rule out hard solipsism and philosophical zombies. Is because consciousness is only known firsthand. You can't observe it secondhand. None of us can show each other that we are conscious beyond, any doubt. And this is the reason that you can't show. We can't go in and say, well, where is this consciousness coming from? What's producing it? Which pipe is it coming out of in the brain? We're not going to find it there. But physicalists never said that we should expect to. That's not part of physicalism.
Yeah, and I would say, well,
I would disagree, but go ahead.
I'm just going to say that to me, the part of, to me, it's just, I agree with the physicalists who say that the why of, there is a first person experience to begin with is a category error. It's like science can't answer the why. It no matter how hard it tries, it will never get there. And I would say the reason why the why has such bite to it, that it still has fangs, is because physicalists still haven't answered the how. And like, if physicalists would focus on the how, and if they're able to explain in the how, the how is still, if they can answer that, is still up to debate. But if they can at least get the how, then to me, it's the why loses its teeth.
Let me ask you, Joel, are you familiar with Christoph Koch?
Maybe not. Tell me.
Okay, so Christoph Koch is was one of the leading neuroscientists through the 90s and early 2000s, before he went on to do the other things that he does now. I think with Essentia Project, and I think he teaches at university or something. He's somewhere out in Seattle. Anyways, this guy, he worked with Francis Crick, really famous scientist that worked on DNA. He worked with him on that, so he's very distinguished. And he was a very what he described himself as a card carrying physicalist. So he considered himself a physicalist, and he was a very prominent neuroscientist. And so he went, and at the time, David Chalmers was going to these TED Talks and these different conventions and meetings, and talking about the hard problem of conscious. That was his book and all that. And so Christoph Koch was invited to challenge David Chalmers, because they were pretty much opposed to each other. So what happened was Christoph Koch did a wine bet with David Chalmers, and he basically said that, look,
I've heard the story of the bet. Sure.
Yeah, he said the hard problem
was it a 10-year?
Yeah,
10-year period.
25 years, because this was in 1998. So the bet, Koch bet Chalmers a case of wine that within 25 years, scientists would identify all the specific neural signatures, mechanisms associated with consciousness. He said your whole hard problem of consciousness is going to dissolve. And, you know, this was all based partly on Koch and Francis Crick's program of looking at neural correlates of consciousness, the NCCs back then. He was already working with Crick on that. So Koch was betting that the science would identify the neural basis of correlates of consciousness and then solve the hard problem of consciousness. But as it turned out a few years ago, Koch had to, you know, buy the wine because he lost the bet, obviously. But also Christoph Koch now is a card-carrying idealist, which is really interesting. He's no longer a physicalist. So anyways, the point of what I was saying is that I think it's wrong maybe to say that no physicalists don't say that the hard problem is something that can be solved. I think they think that many think that it can, at least one of the leading physicalists, I guess, if you want to say that. I don't know if that's an argument from authority or not. I don't know.
Well, you're probably right. I shouldn't say no one's ever said it if someone said it. I guess my experience with the idea, with my familiarity with it, has been kind of flavored by certain people that I've heard speak on it who don't seem to view it that way. And if we went back 25 years, it might be a lot more common to find people that think that.
Yeah.
I guess my thing about it is like, you can look at a problem and you can say this will never be solved. We'll never know the answer to this. No matter how much we learn, no matter how much progress we make, we're never going to know the answer here. I think that's pretty naive. And I think it's equally naive to say, well, this looks tough, but we'll have it figured out in 25 years. And people make mistakes. People who are right about one thing can be wrong about another. People can, he's changed his mind. Is it the same flaw in reasoning that made him think, okay, we'll have it figured out in 25 years, that makes him now go, well, I guess I better be an idealist? I don't know. Yep. Maybe, I assume he's a smart guy, right? But even the smartest people, you'll find them expressing fallacies at times. So yes. I feel like we've got to kind of, look at these things more fairly. And to me, in this sense, it's to say, it's not to say, hey guys, we're gonna have this figured out. I don't even say, hey, some point in the future, science is gonna have the answers here. I just say that we can't say that it's not gonna happen. We can't say it's never gonna happen, and we can't say that it's impossible that that's what's going on. We've got to be able to show. And if we're gonna be able to show anything, it's gonna be using science. And if we're going to be able to show anything using science, it's going to be something physical, right? And I'm saying that's where we're actually going to have answers going forward. As we learn, they're going to be more and more physical answers, right? Well, I don't anticipate a time in the future where someone's able to show in a definitive way some other explanation for consciousness that isn't physical. Claire?
Yeah, man, I think we agree on so much there. I really like what you said about it's pretty much agreeing with me that it's just too strong of a claim to say that physicalism or scientists will never have a physical explanation for consciousness. That's a little bit too hard of a claim to make. It's also too hard to go in the opposite direction and say that they will at some particular time have the answers. I think that the most honest thing is to say we don't know and to keep trying, because I'm kind of like Sadhguru in that respect, that I don't know is the space we give ourselves to learn. If we know every damn thing, we're never going to learn any damn thing, right?
Yeah, there you go.
And I agree with that 100%. How you doing, Set Scales?
Hello, how's everyone doing? I'm good.
Doing good, man. Do you have anything to offer to the conversation? I'm going to get back to the audience been asking about free will questions and morality. So, but go ahead, Set Scales. Do you have any thoughts?
I see I saw the title, and yes, I did want to join because of the title and what I thought free will was. So I say we do have free will, and it is defined entirely by our limitations. And it is the fact that we have been freed from the will as an individual expression that is entirely itself. It's not belonging to a higher will or some collective. Each individual person makes their own choices in life and lives with their choices. And free will is all about balancing the forces of order and chaos, which is exactly what I just said. We have many choices that we could make in our life at any moment, and we could do any number of things, but we can only make one choice at a time. And the choices that we make for ourselves are the ones that we have to live with. So we take from this pool of potential of choices that we can make and collapse it into a singular path that we call our life. And this is what free will is all about.
So a while back, I devised like this flow chart. I shared it with Nelly. She kind of gave me some pushback on it, which I'm very appreciative of. We can kind of discuss it. I kind of look at it like this. And I agree with like Dave Pandeist out there, if you're still out there, brother, that nature is the datum of truth. In other words, it's pretty much how we come to know what's real, what's, how we do all inferences about this objective world out there, right? So I would say that objectively, I am in nature. My nature as a human is to observe, deliberate, make choices based on memory, internal feelings, and knowledge. Number 3, this gives me a degree of freedom within those constraints you just described, set scales, and cause differences. And so this degree of freedom allows for objective moral ethics to exist in that aspect, at least grounded in nature, that sort of thing. I know that there's some problems with this little flow chart, possibly logically. I'm trying to work it out. Do you guys have anything that you want to add to that, or tell me where I'm in error?
Well, what I was going to say was it looks to me like you're trying to get from the idea of free will to the idea of moral responsibility.
Yes.
And I can appreciate that. I've been thinking a lot lately about how I think whenever people are having these debates over free will, I think that's what's at stake, right?
Yes.
Does that resonate with everyone, that like when we talk about, well, do we have free will or don't we have free will? The idea that there is no free will seems to come up against the idea that we can hold people responsible.
Personally, no. I mean, I probably used to, but I'd say ever since becoming like a causal determinist, it's like, to me, it's, at least from my point of view, it seems like a category error to think just because, we don't have free will, then there's no moral responsibility. We are social, creatures by evolution. It's like, we have this built-in morality. So regardless of whether, of the free will question, it's like we're going to hold each other morally responsible. Like,
just saying that we're going to do it. I'm asking is, don't you think that like there's a difference between like if you found out that someone in your community was killed by someone else in your community, versus finding out that they had accidentally been killed, a tree fell and hit them, and you would say, well, in one case there's an agent who needs to be held morally responsible, and in the other case there's an object that's not an agent, and of course we're not going to go out there and punish try to punish this tree for it, or in any way hold it morally responsible.
Depends on who you
however
are.
we might do that. So what is that? What's the difference there that makes that difference for us?
The difference is that it's a human being who's doing it to another human being, and human beings have the same, or relatively speaking, the same capacity to act and think in the world, whereas a tree is stationary, and if it falls, it could be because its roots gave out, or a huge gust of wind blew it over, or some other external force that made the tree fall over, whereas the human being is in full control of their body, and if
Well,
they
the control
go out,
is what we're.
yeah,
But
but
you said from the outset that you agree, that you think free will is something that we all have. Nelly is coming at it from the exact opposite and saying we don't have free will because everything is causally determined, and
well,
that's what I was addressing.
let's say that you take a gun or whatever and shoot someone. So, what is causally deterministic about that? When
No,
they can very easily
Seth,
not pull the
Seth,
trigger.
I'm
Well,
not a causal determinist.
well, this is
I'm not a causal determinist. I was asking Nelly the question because she's a causal determinist, and you answered, but you're not a causal determinist. The question was for her because she is a causal determinist. I get that for you and me, the difference between a tree and a human is that a human has control over what we do, but that's not causal determinism. That's not hard determinism.
Yeah, I didn't really realize you were directing it at her.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just saying, in response to that idea that there isn't free will happening.
Mm-hmm. Wait, so
we were saying, can moral responsibility be rooted in something when there is no free will happening? Was I think the dispute. And you're saying yes, you think it can be.
Because I feel like there's a lot of semantics going on here, because it's like a determinist and like a compatibilist, which I'm assuming you're a compatibilist, Joel.
Yeah, I am.
We can agree on a lot of the same things. It's just how I would say the framing of it all, because it's like I would say we have a will, we have agency. It's just I wouldn't say it's free in any meaningful way.
Mm-hmm.
It does, or perhaps.
Well, if it's if it's your will, whether you want to call it free or not, it's whenever you act, you act on your will.
Mm-hmm.
No one else is making you act in a way that's not in line with your will. No one's kind of forcing you to do that. Also, we don't have anybody who's casting some kind of spell on you to make you want something that you wouldn't have really want. I also don't believe in a God who created you to be the way you are and want the things that you want, right? So what I'm saying when I say free will is I'm saying none of those things are happening. We're all acting on our own will. Every single one of us has a will of our own, and that's what we use to determine what we're going to do.
Yeah, and and to me, it's like, well, if you want to say that the quote unquote free choices that we make throughout our daily life, that isn't based on corrosion or corrosion, and isn't based on I guess a tumor in your brain causing your personality to completely change, like all these sorts of things. It's like, I guess you could call that free will if you want. It's just I don't see the need to call it that.
Well, could we possibly be constraining ourselves to just a very limited way of perceiving logic? Like, is there kind of like a paraconsistent approach that would maybe give us a way to say that we both have free will and we don't? I know that sounds like a classic contradiction. You can't be two things at the same time that are different in the same way, but I kind of embrace paradoxes sometimes. So like a paraconsistent framework might say that you don't necessarily have to eliminate one proposition. Instead, you can maybe retain both while just kind of refusing the classical or traditional inference, right? And it becomes paraconsistent. So like, in other words, maybe we are free because we're definitely ignorant of the future. We feel ourselves having to make decisions all the time. We're constrained, obviously, but we're still making decisions freely. Maybe it's like a semantic thing that makes this whole contradiction go away.
Well, to me, it's not a contradiction to be a compatibilist. I don't think you need paraconsistent logic because what we're talking about when we say free will is happening and causal determinism is happening are not really contradictions of each other. You know, they're definitely not direct negations of each other. And so it's another one of those situations where if you were assuming that those two things were at odds, you would look at that and go, hey, one or the other of these things has to be true and the other one has to be false. But I think a compatibilist view of it is a way of seeing these things and saying, no, both of these things really are compatible with each other. I mean, that's what we mean when we say compatible, is they are not in contradiction.
Yeah. And even though I'm a causal determinist, it's like I wouldn't even try to be like, hey, you're wrong, you need to be a determinist like me. It's like I can understand why a compatibilist would come to, you know, that viewpoint. The one that doesn't make sense to me is libertarian free will, where you try to make the case that there is nothing constraining, you know, your choices in any way.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not even sure. I've never heard it phrased that way, as nothing is constraining my choices. What I've heard it often phrased as, if you could go back and look at any choice and then say, could you have done otherwise? And the idea is to notice that the reasons that you had at the time that led you to make the choice would do that every single time. You know, you're not some kind of you know, thing that can change and not respond in the way that you respond to things, and in the exact same circumstance you would do the exact same thing. And I think one thing about this that always fascinates me is that we have to think about it in past tense. It has to be something that we already did and it already happened that way, and we go, well, if we did it again, could it happen another way? And it's like, no, it couldn't. I agree with that. Well, but what about it when we're looking forward at any decision that we might make in the future? If I were to say, hey, well, you know, tomorrow hasn't come yet, but I'm either going to have sandwiches for lunch, or I'm going to go out to eat, right? And it is the case that, like, once I do that, once I make that choice and I go with it, I can't go back and do something different. But it sure feels like right now, looking forward at it, either of one of those things is open to me, right?
Yeah, that's what I called, or making order out of chaos. You have these choices, but once you make your choice, you have to live with your choice, and then these choices basically carry you through life. But when it comes to limitations, the limitations that I think exist as a human being, there's several, such as your body. You're limited to what a human body can do, and even then there's nuances within our bodies. You're limited by your knowledge and imagination, and you're limited by the physical constants of the universe itself. And how we navigate these limitations is how we use our free will.
Yeah, and like on a non-dualist view, like I just don't feel like I have to choose between free will and determinism, as though one must completely eliminate the other, right? Like I was saying, on a compatibilist or paraconsistent or non-dualist view, I mean, you can still acknowledge the tension, because I get it, it's there, but my decision can be determined by prior conditions, and yet I can nevertheless be the agent who deliberates and evaluates between all the reasons and then produces the action. You know, the it only becomes really fatal if we just assume that being free means being causally unconditioned. I don't think it necessarily does. I think freedom is a degree of self-governance within the causality and constraints. Does that make sense?
Yeah, a lot of people I think seem to think that free will means you have no limitations, and it'd be like you're flying
Right.
space. You go from planet to planet in an instant. You know,
Yeah,
like
you can fly by just moving your arms. Yeah.
yeah, this is
Yeah,
not it.
I find that a lot of conversations about free will or not free will seem to focus on, well, there's this thing, there's this limitation that's keeping you from doing this, or the reason that you want to do this is because of something that's out of your control, something upstream that caused you to be that way. And all of those things always seem to be missing the point to me, of what we're talking about when we're talking about free will, which is
All right, we got
that for
Pastor
whatever
Greg
reason.
come through.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hey, Pastor Greg, what's going on, brother?
Hey, how you doing? Doing well. Sorry. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
been busy this morning. I saw the topic.
Thank you for
I
coming
wanted to
through,
follow.
man. I want to get your Christian perspective as well, man. That's very valuable in this. Have you been listening to the conversation much?
I haven't. I just saw that you had put out a link for the live stream and said, to come get involved. So yeah, no. But I saw the topic. It looked like it was consciousness, free will, God.
Yeah.
Things along those lines. Yeah. Things that
So it's
we've
kind
been
of
talking
picking
about
up where we left off in our little discussion. So I just thought, why not just bring it to the rest of the crowd and see what they have to say.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, I would really like to get your view, because a lot of this ties in, like we were just talking about free will and morality. We already went over these, and me and you, Greg, we've already discussed the hard problems of consciousness and all those things. And I think we both agree that physicalism for right now is coming up a little short on that. And so this is kind of opening up a space to consider things like God, maybe other views of something. But I'm just wondering, how do you think that the Christian worldview might be able to fix a lot of these things we're talking about?
Well, I mean, I think there's at least an understanding that there's a possibility that there has to be something that would be outside of the physical. If there was something that was created, or there would probably be something that was outside of that actually did the creation. And I know people have heard about that before. There's been lots of arguments about different reasons why that could or could not be. I think, though, when you start looking at there being either an immaterial or a material thing that's driving this, I think when you start getting into things like rationale, you start getting into morality, you start getting into let's face it, someone saying that they're going to be willing to die for someone else, that seems to go counter to, if I'm thinking about survival, if I'm thinking what's best for my situation or for even my community, probably my own death would not normally be that, and certainly not for myself. And so there are some aspects of the human decision, the way that we live our lives, that doesn't seem to come from something that would happen just from the natural. If it was to have developed because of, just the natural development, it seems like there'd be something that's there behind it. And it's not to say that we can point to it and say we know it for fact with absolute certainty. I think it raises the possibility and puts you in a place where you have an alternative that you've walked through deduction, through inference, through reasoning, where you can look at observable evidence and say, at least there's a possibility of this thing, and I probably should at least entertain it, and start to just see, okay, is this something that has some merit to it? I think probably both sides in this debate probably come from a way of thinking about it, and it's really easy to fall into the I've already logicked my way to whatever I believe now, and because there haven't been a whole lot, I don't think there's been a lot of new ways of thinking about those things. But I do think there are others now that are coming out, and I think you've got a model that's kind of is very interesting in that regard. We've talked about the model that I have, and I think it's at least opening for more discussion, and a little bit different reasoning behind why we're saying what we're saying. So,
And your model is called ANT, like ant, right? And do you want to describe that for us so we know what we're talking about?
You bet. And it's interesting. I actually don't think some people I think that are Christian may look at it and say, okay, are you trying to tell us there's a new way of thinking, a new Christianity? No, absolutely not. I think what I'm trying to do is things that Christians have held to and have pointed out and said about God. If you really hold those things consistently to those, I think we actually believe one thing and say another thing. And in particular, it's in the area of chronology and transcendency. We say we have a transcendent God, but yet when we talk about him, he's a God that determines things. He does things in sequence. He remembers things. Part of that is because the Bible may say it, but I think it's that we are failing to recognize that if God was actually communicating to something to us, where he's trying to get us as chronological beings to understand him as something that's transcendent, he's going to use our language and it's not anthropomorphism. It's him speaking to us in a way that maybe we could catch a glimpse of what he's actually doing. So it'll look to us like he's determined, that he has done a plan, that he has set things in sequence, when in truth, that's what it's going to look like to us. And he's saying but this is how I really am in the midst of it.
So how does that affect the Kalam cosmological argument? Because it sounds like you agree with me that, causation is just kind of a way of talking about the way God relates, or the way things relate, or whatever situation we're making the topic. But it seems like for you, causation is simply like a way of speaking about those relational things, like the relationship between God and man. Right. It's not that they chronology, like the way we conceive of things, like this came first and then that caused this. And we know reality is a lot more complicated than that. Like, obviously, like I was debating with someone last night, and we were talking about, like, he was saying, you have this point and it hits that point, then that point moves and affects this point. And then it's like, but I'm just kind of skeptical of that, because I think reality is a lot more complex than just little point by points. I think we've got almost an infinite amount of factors that are always at play that make things so undeterminate. It's like, we don't know what's going to happen if we do this again. Like, so we're really talking about how things relate, and the relations, just like everything else, is constantly changing. Like, we're always in a flow state, a constant change of relations, and then the properties that it instantiates. And so when you think about God, and I think about your model, you're kind of saying that God is kind of like that, and he's kind of just expressing it different in the Bible, just as a way of speaking about it.
Right. I think in some ways we've done ourselves, probably both sides, we've all done a disservice to ourselves in trying to uncover truth, because we, believe it or not, I think we all start in a place that's probably a little bit downstream from the place where we should be starting. A lot of Christians will think, hey, we need to start with, is there a God or is there not a God? And I think that probably atheists or naturalists are probably asking the same thing of us, because it seems like that's the fundamental issue. But I think what you probably end up, if you're going back upstream from that, what you're asking is, okay, what is the nature of reality? And, and so if we go upstream from that and you say, okay, what is what is reality? Well, it just is what is. If we can agree on that what reality is whatever is truly true. That's what it is. And ultimate reality would be if I could possibly reduce that thing down to the place where necessity, there's nothing else that I could go down where it would be either a derivative of where I'm talking about a derivative. I've got to get down to something that's constitutive. And ultimate reality would be where it's sufficient within itself completely, and it's got no deficiency within itself. And so that's the kind of thing that we try to move towards. And the thing that I thought was really interesting about your model, where it kind of opened my eyes to things, was when you started talking about relational, that it could be relational, and it's not just because I was talking about this ultimate reality goes back to some sort of essence. And you were like, is that a substrate? Is that a substance? And you were thinking that was what I was meaning by essence. And then we went, wait a minute, it's really just what is. And what is could be really at its base areas. You know, if there's an A and there's a B, it's actually the relationship of A and B that could be the reality.
It's what's between the blank. It's the blank page between the words. That's where the real meaning and reality comes in, which is serious and weird. And it's a very, idealistic thing to say, sort of like a Platonic way of thinking about things. But in actuality, it seems like that's all we can really talk about is those patterns. Right. I mean, we like to talk about causation as though it's real, but that's not really, that hasn't really been established.
I think what you said just there is really important. It's not been established. And I think that both sides, and I know as Christians, sometimes we jump to this, but also sometimes we are asked to jump to this before it's been earned. And that's, sometimes it's, we talk about there being something that is the irreducible necessity that would be what ultimate reality would be. And it's automatically taken with us and said, oh, so you're talking about that being God. And it's like, wait a minute, I haven't earned that yet. And if we'll talk together and keep working at this thing going forward, we might find that to be true.
Let's do that. Let's do that. Actually, I want to turn this over to the rest of the panel because I've been talking too much. Let's start with Joel. Yeah. Joel, do you have any maybe thoughts about what you've heard regarding like a Christian kind of relational non-dualist view that he's kind of putting forward? His view is called ANT, but basically
I can tell you what it stands for if you want, if that would
go
help.
Ahead. Yeah.
Okay. What I came to was basically there are three principles that we believe about God, but that we don't always consistently hold to. And it's actually that, and the first one maybe not one of those. It may be something that's kind of a newer thought but I can point to it in Scripture. It's actually that ultimate reality can operate autonomically through its power, its omnipotence. There doesn't have to be awareness for something that's omnipotent to actually move and to do something. If you're saying that something that's omnipotent has to be aware, you've just made it not omnipotent. You put a condition upon it. And so if God actually, and that's the first thing, is autonomic omnipotence. The second part is non-sequential. So he doesn't operate in a sequence. And then the third one is transcendent, that we don't apply transcendency consistently. If you do that consistently in talking about that thing that's the ultimate reality, and if it's personal, happens to be personal, then it's it's really pretty plausible to think, okay, this could actually be God. But the thing is, I think we jump too quickly to define it as God. I think what we need to do is make sure that in our conversations, we earn it all the way up. Which is, I think, what we've been doing in our conversations. You've probably noticed I've not mentioned God in our conversations.
No, I know you won't get past. Yeah, we're not going past a certain point. which I respect that, because you're trying to really build the premise of the whole story so that we can kind of be on the same page all the way along, which I appreciate that, because we have to walk slow, not just jump from one thing to another. Yeah.
Well, I think we jump so quickly to try to defend maybe what is our own personal belief in that thing, that what we're actually doing is we're taking away our ability to work together to actually come to the discovery of truth. And I, you know me, I'm a Christian. So in the end, I'm thinking this is God, it's through Christ, it's the Trinity, this is the relation, all that kind of stuff. What I've been forcing myself to do is to say, every time I think I'm going to purport that I could purport that, or someone could say, this is where you're going with that, I stop and I say, wait a minute, have I earned that yet? No. If I haven't earned it, I can't claim it. So because we're too fast to jump to that. And as a result, what we end up is with Christians that are looking and saying, hey, wait a minute, I don't know that I could actually demonstrate why this is real. And then you have people that are have walked away from the faith or have never been a part of the faith because they thought there was no way it could be plausible. And so I think it's time for us to take those smaller steps forward. And as
I can appreciate taking steps and earning them. I will applaud you for that. But I also think there's room for kind of saying, you know, like if you are a theist, if you are a Christian, and the thing that you're talking about that transcends reality is a God, then you know, I appreciate that you're not just kind of asserting it and acting like we should all let it stand. But what I guess is throwing me for a loop is that you're talking about it. You're saying autonomous, as in, you know, it's not really a thinking agent like you and I that you know, acts with intention. And so it is one of my first reactions when I heard you say it was, well, it doesn't really sound like what I think of when I think of a God. It sounds like something that is no longer personal, and therefore, you know, even if it is some kind of you know, thing that acts upon reality, you know, and kind of fills that space that a lot of people put, you know, that a lot of theists will put a God in. Does it really qualify as that category if it's not a person?
Right, and I think that and we haven't talked about it because it's one of the places I think there's a lot of discussion still about, even between Dub and myself, or Scott, and is this outstanding question: is this thing that is an infinite, is a perfect, irreducible, I say essence, you would say some kind of relational potentiality, I think is how you term it, Scott. Is it personal or is it impersonal? I think, like, if you look at it from Occam's razor standpoint, you probably, if you're being intellectually honest, you'd have to start off with probably impersonal is the place that has the fewest assumptions, is the simplest conclusion to draw. And so if you're being intellectually honest, it has to start in the lead. I think what ends up happening is when you look at the observable evidence in terms of what we have in morality, we have in a whole lot of things around consciousness, around interpersonal community or interactions. And I'm not a philosophy person, so there's a lot more things that are involved there. But on the personal side, that are probably better explainable as far as telling what the power of actually explaining why things are there or why they operate as they do. I think your explanatory power is probably stronger in the personal in the long run. So what you end up with is, I look at it like a tree. I think you start off in a place where it's simplest on the impersonal side, and so your from Occam's razor would be better there, but you end up with this tree with branches that goes up, and on the impersonal side, every one of those branches has to have its own explanation. With the personal side, you have all of those branches going back to one trunk. So in the long run, it looks like the personal, actually, in explanatory power, probably overcomes the simplicity up front of the impersonal model. It's not that I'm saying that both aren't possible, though. I think you can say that the impersonal one is. So that's why I don't step out and say, hey, I can tell you for absolute certainty that this thing is personal. But what I think it leads you to a place of is that even with Occam's razor and all the things that we observe, that you would end up in a place where both of them have a pretty good chance of being, that they could be possibly the way it happens. And they're not, it's not like one of them is so outrageously ahead of the other that any belief in that other view would be like a giant leap of faith, like a blind leap of faith. I think it really comes down to, you can be equally almost convinced of both sides, and you have to make a decision as to what you're going to believe. And because I don't think we're going to have absolute certainty on either side ever. So I think that's where you end up.
Yeah, and I agree that we're not going to get absolute certainty. It kind of sounds to me like you're saying that, yeah, you do believe in a personal God that does act with intention, but you're calling it autonomous. And I'm wondering, autonomic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What are you meaning then? If you're talking about something that is a person and has intentions that they act on, then in what sense is it autonomic?
Well, that goes to the question of personhood then. And how do we define personhood? I think part of the struggle that we face is that we define personhood by what we can see. And so the only thing we can see is probably its most complex is us as humans, and what it means for us to be a person. We operate chronologically. We operate in a way where we take in new information. From that information, we make a determination. From that determination, we make a choice, and then we act, and then we analyze it. If you're a transcendent being, that whole process is just your reality. And so, can God be personal? It in some ways, it sounds like up front that it would be no, but from the standpoint of kind of what it operates as, but in terms of how it relates to us, it's highly personal. It's just that we experience all of those steps chronologically. It experiences them as one reality. So it's hard for us to talk about what personhood would look like for something that's transcendent. That's
pretty hard to. That's hard to imagine. I agree.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't quite understand how that cleared up what it means to be autonomic for this thing. It's outside of time. It experiences all of what we experience sequentially. It just is the case outside of time. But
so did God?
But it doesn't tell me what's autonomic about that.
I think the best way, I hesitate to do this from the standpoint of, I try not to go to the Bible and try to point it out, but maybe in this case, it might be the fastest way for us to get to, here's how I can see that as a Christian. If you look at the first couple of verses in John, I don't know how familiar you are with it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being by him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. What has often been done in Christianity is to say that this verse only relates to the creation. He's talking about how did time, space, and matter come into play. But if you're talking about a transcendent God, this can actually apply to other things as well. What comes into being is not necessarily what comes into being as far as a first start, but it could be from the standpoint of reflective awareness for this essence that is perfectly, if you are perfectly perfect, you wouldn't even have distinction or the recognition of distinction, because that would almost be a disruption to perfection. I think what you see in those verses in John is perhaps from God's perspective, he's trying to give us a picture of what it was like for him when he started to express things that were relational. And that includes the expression of it within the Trinity. The first thing that God, I think, would become reflectively aware of would be the solution to the problem of all imperfection. In the beginning was the Word, and that talks about the completeness of Jesus, including the risen Jesus. It's as if God comes into, and I don't want to say conscious awareness, because I don't think it's that he's not consciously aware. It's just hard to explain from a transcendent standpoint as a chronological being and trying to explain it in those terms. But it's as if it would look like to me that the first thing that God became aware of was the solution to the problem of all imperfection, and that was his Son. And so in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God and was God. That distinction within the Godhead Trinity actually was something that came through Jesus. So everything flows from the solution to the problem, which was always there, because if you know anything about the Bible, and the name of God as being Yahweh, it means I am that I am what I am. And I think in this case, that meaning is the thing that's really pertinent. It's that his identity is equal to his essence. And so the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, all having the same essence, they would be all there. But if there's no relational distinction, there would be no reflective awareness. But the relationship would be there. And there's that's really deep. There's a lot to go into in a short period of time.
And I gotta say, Greg, not a lot of that makes sense to me. And I think I'm agreeing with you from earlier when you said it's hard to wrap our minds around these things when you kind of posit something outside of time or transcendent or whatever it is. I mean, I get why theists put God out there as that kind of thing. I just say, you got to understand how it comes across when like we can barely even coherently communicate these ideas to each other. So.
And let me say that I'm maybe one of the first people that's expressing this, I think, from a Christian standpoint, this kind of a thing. In some ways, what it might be better to do is listen to what Dub says in his model, because I think what you end up is he's talking more in terms that probably are terms that you would think in. And what ends up happening is, I think the more we talk about these things and compare them and see, I think we're getting to a place of more and more conceptual equivalence. And at some point you start to have to ask yourself, is it more that because we use different terminology, maybe if we talked each other's language, and just like God is trying to, if there is a God and he's been speaking to us in chronological terms, so that we can better understand, maybe we have to do the same thing with each other. So I don't know, Scott, maybe you explain from your perspective what that looks like.
Well, I've talked to Scott quite a bit, and he'll tell you we don't agree on these things. So I see you guys kind of aligning on things and kind of saying, well, maybe when I'm talking about this, that's the same thing you mean when you say by that. That it all tends to be a little beyond what I think is worth us actually concluding and accepting. Scott will all the time tell me, I don't really actually believe this. I don't say this is true. I don't accept that it's true. I don't believe it. I'm guessing you're probably not going to toe that same line as a Christian. You're going to say, no, I believe these things are true.
I would say it's hard for me to say something that I believe it from the standpoint of I'm still wrestling through with it. And so if I'm really being honest about it, I would say that I'm seeing where there's the possibility of it being true. And I think that having the discussions where we beat up on each other and force ourselves not to move beyond what we've actually earned. Like I welcome, Joel, that you're saying, Greg, I don't know that you're proving your point yet, because what that means is I've got to be either able to express it or what I'm expressing is wrong. In Greg, which case we need to talk
Greg,
about
here's like a way that you can maybe, because you touched on a really strong point here, that sometimes the language that we use can be a barrier to understanding. When you talk to maybe science-minded sort of people, you can kind of maybe use like the B theory of time, like the block universe theory as a kind of a example. Like, what would the block universe be like from a perspective that wasn't confined to, say, like a temporal location? Like, imagine your life as a 4-dimensional object. You've got a birth, your childhood, your adulthood, and then finally you die. From your ordinary perspective, you experience chronology, one moment after another, right? In a chronological way. But imagine a perspective that could apprehend the entire space-time structure at once.
Exactly.
That would mean that your whole life would be present to that perspective, not necessarily temporally experienced, but structurally apprehended, kind of like looking at, kind of like, I don't know if you've ever worked with computer programs or DAWs or something where it has like a time counter and you see everything moving across the graph, and you've got like different things that represent like time, some other, statistic or whatever, and it kind of moves through that graph. And and every time you hit the space bar, it's going to play that thing over and over and over and over. From the perspective of the little dot in the graph, it's just going through the motions, one sequence at a time, as it was programmed to do. But from an outside perspective, it's all there. It's just all there in the code, actually. More fundamental is just the code that describes it all right there. So maybe kind of like that. You're saying that God is that non-temporal perspective in that sense. And that gets rid of that whole causation thing.
That's right. Yeah, because I mean, I guess, and you probably have heard people say, "Hey, what's an analogy for this?" I mean, if I was sitting on a sidewalk and I'm watching a parade that goes by, if I'm chronological, I'm seeing the one that's right in front of me. If I'm in the Goodyear blimp and I'm looking at it, I'm seeing the entire parade as one unit. I think the place where that breaks down is if it's really easy to then move from God being transcendent to just being a smarter version of me, a bigger version of me, and saying he's a mind that still sees chronologically, but he just sees further than I do. And I think in God's perspective, if you're really talking about a transcendent being, you're talking about something where it's not just that he knows the future or he knows the past or whatever, it's that he's already experienced it. And so past, present, and future would all be now for him. And so again, so you asked, how can this thing be personal?
But what is now for him? I mean, even now is a temporal distinction. It doesn't make sense for a being outside of God.
Absolutely. And see that you just caught me in using chronological terms about a transcendent being. And so you're exactly right.
I've never heard anybody be able to express anything about a God outside of time without doing that. And to me, that's part of the problem is that I don't know what it would be like to be outside of time. But I guess like what I would say is that you believe that we all begin to exist, right?
Yes.
But for God, was that not like an event that happened? So was there not like a state prior to the existence of this world that you and I live in, where God was the only thing that existed? You say, no, God was outside of time. Nothing ever changes for him. Well, that means that means the world has always existed. That means I've always existed. We know that's not the case.
Right.
So to me, it's kind of like you're just saying something that I can't make sense of.
Well, and I think that's why instead of starting with time or starting with God, what you start with is what is reality. And because we can agree that there is a reality, and reality probably has been a reality. There's always been a truth that is.
And there has always been some state of affairs that was now in reality. And prior to that was the past, and coming up ahead of that is the future. I mean, that's how I think of reality.
Well, but that's also a naturalistic view from the standpoint of we certainly within the physical realm where we know that like the universe was created, and I know we can say, well, but the universe was created from stuff that may have been always there, kind of a thing. What
I would say created is a loaded word, though.
Okay, so what word would you use?
I would say, as from my understanding of the natural world, it's just like phases or transitions, like from one state to another. You know, like there's the pre-Big Bang, and then after that, you know, we have what the universe looks like now. Yeah.
Okay, so there's been that. There is this reality, though, right? There
Yeah.
is.
I'd say,
If there is what is, then
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. You know, the way I've always said it is that, but many theists and atheists will agree that there was always something. It's just we don't agree on what that something is.
Right, and I think if we look at it, probably ultimate reality would be something that would be irreducible. Would you agree with that? Would necessarily always be. If it is, then it necessarily ultimate reality would be necessarily always was.
I don't agree. I don't think it follows.
You don't think that if you have that ultimate reality would be something where if you had a derivative, then would that be ultimate reality that's involved with whatever you're talking about? If it derived from something else, would that be ultimate?
No. The part I'm disagreeing with is that the thing that's ultimate has to continue to exist. I would say, you know, something could be the ultimate cause of something else, but cease to exist.
But reality is not that way. If we're talking about an ultimate cause,
it can be for some causes, yes.
Yeah, if we're talking about a cause, but we're talking about reality, is all I'm talking about.
Reality has to.
I haven't moved the cause yet.
Well, yeah, but what do you mean when you say ultimate reality? You're not talking
There's
about
nothing derivative within it. You couldn't reduce it back to. There's nothing that would formulate it.
Well,
Yeah, they're reduction based.
Then give me an example of something real. Give me an example of something real that you can't do that to.
Quantum fields.
I mean, I don't know from a natural standpoint, because I would say everything that's natural is derived from something. So it would have to be something that was not derived from something.
Well, that's kind of my point. Is that observing reality doesn't get us to the idea that ultimate reality has to be something that couldn't cease to exist or fail to exist. All we can say is that the things that we're experiencing seem to exist. They have to be in existence in order for us to experience them. But it doesn't stand that like the ultimate thing behind them has to continue to exist as well.
I think what is always what is. That's what. I think we're not saying the same thing when we talk about reality. I think is where we are, because I think what is what is, and there will always be a what is going forward. I mean, there's always going to be what is. I guess unless we just say there's going to be a point where what is not. And that sounds kind of contradictory.
There are all kinds of things that are, right? But you would say they're derivative, right? That's what I was saying, was you're distinguishing between things that exist that are derivative from things that are not. And when challenged to present something that wasn't, you said, well, I don't know from a physicalist view whether there is such a thing. So that's
right.
Or you could ask, why does ultimate reality have to be eternal?
Yeah, because I think I'm getting what both of you are saying. Like what I think what Greg is getting at is that ultimate reality has to still, you know, like it couldn't have just ceased to exist. Like for me, from a naturalistic standpoint, like ultimate reality would be the entirety of existence. Like it doesn't make sense to me that.
I see what you mean.
Includes all the derivative things.
Yeah, like so yeah, but so what I'm getting at though is like, so like, you know, you couldn't get something from absolute nothingness, and so that it wouldn't make sense to then say that ultimate reality, which would be all of existence, like it didn't exist at one point. I think is what Greg is saying.
That's right.
Okay.
Because I think what you're describing, Joel, is reality. And what I'm describing is ultimate reality from the standpoint of if you are doing that, then there can be no derivatives associated with it.
I mean, if you're just defining ultimate reality as the thing upon which current reality depends, then yeah, it just follows that it must be there.
Exactly. It's not. It's
I
not.
don't know. I'm convinced there are things upon which our current state of affairs depend, and
Yeah.
you know, our state of affairs would change if those things cease to exist.
Yeah, I recognize I'm taking it back to something really simple. I'm trying to take it back to something that we can all agree on. And that there is.
You're invoking an ultimate reality that is, you're saying, not the reality that we have in evidence, not the one we're directly experiencing.
Let me ask you, Greg. Maybe this is what you're getting at. Are you familiar with the problem of the one and the many?
I'm probably not. From if you explain what you mean by it, I may have
And
heard
before
of it.
Greg answers that question, I'm going to dip out, say goodbye to everybody.
Okay.
Really appreciate getting to
Cool,
participate
man.
today. And Greg, it was really great talking to you first time, and I always love to hear from people who have different points of view and are open to taking questions on it. So thank you.
And Joel, thank you for challenging me back, because that makes me go back now, and I do see an area that I want to think about. So thank you.
Awesome. I love to hear that. All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Y'all have a wonderful
Thank you,
day. I'll
Joel.
be listening in. Talk to you later. Bye.
See you, Joe.
Later on, brother.
Later, Nell. Later, Scott.
All right. Yeah, the problem of the one and the many, it's basically asking how can reality be fundamentally one thing while also containing so many distinct things? Like this came from like Plato and Aristotle, people like that, old Greek philosophy.
Yeah.
And because it seems like reality has two characteristics. There's the one, everything is just one reality, right? Everybody kind of sees that. But the many things within the reality, within that one reality, are things like you, me, trees, rocks, stars, thoughts, experiences, all that stuff. So the question is, if reality is fundamentally one, where does genuine multiplicity come from? So if reality is fundamentally many things, then what explains the unity that connects everything? And I think you're pointing at God as that principle, not necessarily jumping to the personal yet or jumping to anything like that, but you're saying at least on that level, we can say that there is this ultimacy, there is this oneness that we can talk about now and get off the ground with our views.
I do. I think maybe a better way to put it, as opposed to me saying that it's something that's you can reduce it down and it's going to be something that's always constitutive. Is it possible to have an ultimate reality where everything that was within that reality was derivative? Every single thing is derivative.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible?
Yeah. We just, I don't see a contradiction. So yeah.
You think you can have everything be derived from something else as far as ultimate reality, not reality, ultimate reality.
Oh, like, like you mean like some sort of fundamental.
Yeah. If everything is derived from something else, there should be nothing, right? I mean, we probably all recognize that, if you're going back to infinite regress.
Well, no. I would say that it's even simpler than that. You don't have to go that far.
Okay.
I would say that if you're talking about everything that exists, and you're talking about existence, you're talking about things and events and ideas and stuff like that are real. Yeah. Those things are all within reality, but I think that they are here in lieu of other things. In other words,
they were derived from
all these many pluralities are instantiations of the one. So the instantiations come from that ultimacy. And that ultimacy, like I told you before, I described that as kind of like an integrated, non-dual relation. So it's all integrated. It's all defined by its mutual dependencies. So like I was talking about before, like if you, let's take an electron, for example, right? An electron as a particle. It's made up of mass, spin, and charge. But if you take any of those properties away, it no longer is an electron, right? So the thing electron, that object, is really dependent on how it relates to things like mass, spin, and charge. Without any of those things, it stops being the electron. So everything is what it is because of some condition that's between. It's an invisible thing. It's not material. This is a non-physical view. A lot of people don't like this because it seems to be a little too idealistic or a little too Platonic or theistic or whatever.
Right.
But to me, it makes perfect sense. And that's why I keep talking to you about this stuff, because we're kind of saying the same thing in a way.
Yeah, I think we're coming at the same thing from a different direction.
Right. And, you know, you're calling it a personal God, which I don't have a problem with.
Well,
I just
remember, I actually have never called it a personal God yet.
Right, you haven't, but I'm saying somebody may, at the end of the day, it may lead to that, you know, the Christian God, or
if I'm being honest, but yeah.
Yeah, and if a person did that, I don't have a problem with that. I don't see a contradiction in that. The only thing that I just have questions, like, how do we get from that? But I also have a big imagination too. Like, I can already think of a million different ways to get there besides just one way. Like, there's so many ways to get to there but that's part of the problem, though, is the fact that there's so many ways to get there. Which way is the way? You know,
there's 1,000 different possibilities. I think it's incumbent on us to challenge every one of those and kind of look and see, okay, do they hold up based on, you know, what we can do, what we can infer, you know, instead of jumping and saying, hey, I think we jump to belief and speak about it sometimes as if it's absolute certainty. And I think we need to be very careful of that.
Yeah, and then we have a question. This may throw people off that are not familiar. Nanology 101 says, what about ultra reality? I'm not sure what that is.
I wonder if it's, well, let me read this because it's something I wrote, and sometimes I'm better in what I wrote. I write in terms of what I share. Ultimate reality, and so I wonder if this is going to be ultra reality. Ultimate reality cannot consist entirely of derived existence. If every explanation depends upon another explanation, then no explanation is ever ultimate. If every reality derives from a more fundamental reality, then ultimate reality is never reached. Reality must terminate in that which cannot be reduced further.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would wonder if this person who asked this question about ultra reality, how would they define ultra reality? Is it the way I've just explained it?
I mean, personally, I thought that they were just joking. Like,
they probably are, but
oh, okay.
Put an LOL after it, but
oh, well, then that would probably be a joke. But maybe that is not a bad thing, because it gets us to say, okay, that's what I'm talking about when I say ultimate reality. Maybe it's just that's exactly what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think.
What do you think, Nelly?
Well, I mean, I agree with what Greg is saying. I think, you know, if we're talking about what is most fundamental, you know, it can't be reduced to something else. And it's just what is that thing that is, you know, irreducible. And for the theist, it's God. For atheists, it's, you know, well, it just depends on what sort of atheist they are. I'd say, you know, a physicalist might say quantum information or quantum fields, or if they believe consciousness first, they might say, well, consciousness. So
yeah. And I think if we're being honest about it, there are things that would probably favor an impersonal view of what that is, but there are also things that would point towards it possibly being personal. And
I mean, I would like to know I would like to know your reasonings for why it would be personal, because at least from my, like, if I were to become an idealist or go the consciousness first route, and I was trying to make sense of a conscious foundation through looking at the natural world, it would make sense to me that, you know, where we start out, you know, billions of years ago with the expansion, it's like things start out simple,
yeah,
and things gradually become more complex, And so to me, when I look at something that's personal, like a personal being is a very complex organism. And
Yeah.
so to me, if we're looking at a simple fundamental consciousness, it doesn't click to me that it would be personal.
Okay, so I'll just say this is why I lean personal, and it doesn't mean we're going to agree or whatever, but at least you'll know why I think the way I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so consciousness, rationality, morality, beauty, meaning, relationship, self-sacrifice. I mean, there's a lot of different things that are there. It's not that you couldn't have an impersonal thing that developed into those, right? I won't say that it could not happen, but now you probably have to have an explanation for a separate explanation for each one of those. So whereas you start off from Occam's razor standpoint as being the simpler solution, the question is, when you look at the expansive explanatory power, does that simpler solution become more complicated in the long run than was the one that was, hey, this thing just happened to be personal and all of these things are derived, and we observe things that are personal. Even in our realm of the physical, we see those things having those things. I can point back to the trunk. Someone who's looking at it as being impersonal would have to explain each one of those. So I think it becomes more complicated.
I mean, personally, first of all, I don't like really prescribe to a consciousness first, but like I'm not really seeing the issue with going from impersonal, simple to personal, complex, and then explaining, value, beauty, morality,
Well, and again, hear me loud and clear. I'm not saying that it couldn't happen. I think there are explanations that you could give. The question is, if I'm going on the basis of Occam's razor, and I believe the simpler solution is that thing is just personal, and because of the explanatory power.
So I mean, but we also have to be careful how when we're applying Occam's razor, because yes, I agree with you that if all things being equal, let's say there's two equal explanatory metaphysical frameworks, then we can usually defer to Occam's razor and say the one with the least assumptions is probably most likely,
right? But
it's like when we're dealing with empirical science, though, it really doesn't care about Occam's razor. It could, reality can always be more complex than we once thought, even though we may prefer simple explanations. To me, it's like if I'm looking at how just nature functions and I'm looking at the scientific data, it's like it seems like things would start out simple and go into the more complex. So even if you could make a philosophical argument that what you're saying is simpler, it doesn't seem to align with reality.
I understand. I understand the perspective. And again, as I've said,
well, here's a way to look at it, though. Here's another way. And we can go back to the science again. We can take the science and flip it. So there's this thing called retrocausality, and this is going to be kind of a weird way. Like I told you, there's ways I can imagine. I'm not saying this is the case, but I'm saying there's ways that I can make this thing work if I really use my imagination and be logical about it at the same time. So with retrocausality, ordinary causation is past, present, future, right? But physics kind of tells us that retrocausal relationships are valid. In fact, we've seen those, like future conditions affect like present or even past conditions. So it doesn't mean that the future travels back in time. It's just that there's this thing called retrocausality. And it can instead mean that the complete space-time, say, solution is constrained by conditions at more than one temporal boundary. So think of solving like a math problem. You say you've got initial conditions and then you've got the final condition, right? Now, the allowed trajectory has to satisfy both of these things. So, then the future isn't merely something that gets, something that gets produced by the past in that case, right? The whole story of history constrains itself as a fourth dimensional structure. So with retrocausality, you can now introduce personal, because suppose ultimate reality has a top-down role in determining which possible histories are realized. Then individual persons wouldn't necessarily be created by an external person. Instead, the persons could be internally realized as expressions of the fundamental reality in that case. So it works. It would actually work. You'd get ultimate reality. It constrains the whole space-time history, not just our little notion of sequences, which includes biological systems, individual conscious perspectives, all of that. And so the ultimate reality is personal, not because it's a giant human-like person sitting outside of the universe, but because persons, as we know it, are expressions within that eternal fundamental structure. Does that make any sense? Maybe that's a little too deep. I don't know.
No, I thought you were asking Nelly.
I'm just asking both of you guys if it makes any sense whatsoever.
It's personal because can you try to connect those dots again there?
Yeah, think about top-down causation, and it's possible only because of retro causality. In other words, when we can kind of shift our view of the universe being from like an A theory, which would be like sequence of time, like reality is basically the past does not exist. There's only the present that ever exists. The future hasn't come here yet, right? That's A theory. B theory is that all of it simultaneously exists, equally real. And you could think of a huge block as an analogy, like a block of ice, where inside the block is all the events and people and everything like that. Mm-hmm. Well, retrocausality says that since that's the case, because we experience time moving forward, but on the block theory, it doesn't move like that. It's all there, right? So with retrocausality, things from the future can affect things in the present or the past.
Wait, right? Hold on, Scott. Just so we're on the same page. Like, I know that under general relativity and block universe, time is relative. So and there is how we view the past, present, future isn't what we think on the B block. But when you said that time doesn't move forward on the B theory, is that you said that right? It doesn't.
Yeah, like the fundamental reality establishes like a universal or globally coherent space-time history. Mm-hmm. So all your deliberations and choices are themselves, genuine components of the entire solution in the universe.
Because I thought, like, as far as I'm aware, like general relativity isn't saying that time isn't moving forward, like they're that the arrow of time. It's just that the arrow of time is going to move differently depending on where you are in the universe. I thought that's what.
Yeah, well, block theory it entails that, but from that fact is why we can talk about a block universe that in a block universe model, the entire sequence is one four-dimensional structure, right? But if there are also future boundary constraints in the future from us, you could conceptually have like a future, present, and past, and still retain, reasons, deliberation, and choice because you're within there. So your decision isn't necessarily bypassed by ultimate reality. Your decision is part of the mechanism by which the larger history is realized at the end of the day. And that's kind of important because the top-down explanation wouldn't have to replace the bottom-up explanation at all. Both can cohere. So it just seems like our language constrains us from thinking, present to the future, or past to the present to the future.
Yeah. I agree from the standpoint of, I think our language is all, and our mindset is all chronological for the most, and it's very, and what we're talking about is something that's transcendent.
I'm only offering this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm only offering it as an idea because there's still problems with that. Like we still have to, like for me, the main thing is the problem of evil. Like, even if all that was true and there is like this, mind that supervenes on everything that exists and happens in reality, well, we still have a whole lot of evil in the world and unnecessary suffering. So I try to make sense of that as well. Like, how would that fit? So I'm more comfortable saying that, personally, I'm more comfortable saying that whatever this is that gives rise to reality as we see it is impersonal, because I would hate that the universe hates me so bad that it causes all the pains in my life and problems. Right. That's the only issue.
Well, think about that. When you say that the universe causes all my pains, and let's say it's not, let's not say universe, let's say whatever is the irreducible reality that is there. If that, whether it's immaterial or personal or impersonal, that thing, what we're talking about, that thing is doing is actually looking at us and making a determination that is going to choose to either allow this pain and suffering to happen or not allow that pain and suffering to happen. That thing has now been made chronological. And if you're talking about block theory or you're talking about the language I use in transcendency, if there's no past, present, and future, there's no sequence, then we're actually applying the wrong question. We're asking the wrong question. We are saying that this thing that is the irreducible essence or whatever it is, that this thing is acting chronologically, and yet it's outside of time. It shouldn't actually act that way. It shouldn't make a determination. What would probably end up happening is that, again, and I hate to say it, I go back to my autonomically, if this thing is omnipotent, it would almost like run the play without thinking about the play.
Right.
But because it's omnipotent and it is perfect in meaning lacks, it's all sufficient within itself. It lacks no deficit, or has no deficit. If we say that's perfect, it would do whatever is perfect omnipotently. It would do it without determining to do it. Now, we obviously don't have a perfect world. So then you have to start asking, okay, would this stuff come from this thing that was perfect, or would it happen from what was the derivative? And I think at least the Christian answer there is that it happens with the derivative that was put in place, or that came through this thing, that whatever it ran the play, it included things that did stuff within that model. And I think probably what it means is that you're looking at something that's personal, irreducible, in essence, that is shooting at something that's maximally perfect. And because it's doing it autonomically, and its omnipotence, it's putting in place the thing that should be perfect without awareness. And so it's I don't know. I think there's a lot to dive down into there. And I think Nelly, I think you're asking all the right questions. I think this is why we have these kinds of conversations, is so that we can challenge ourselves and go say, how do I reconcile that? How do I think about that one based on what we have derived, what we have inferred, what's the next step that we need to be contemplating. Mm-hmm.
So I did want to just get your clarification on what you mean by perfect, because I always run into, we have different ideas of what perfect means. And so to me, it's like, if something was truly perfect, then it wouldn't change or do anything. So why would it create a universe? And so, like, what is this, like, need or desire to create? Like, what is,
Would
how
it
is
have,
that part?
first of all, I don't think it would have a need or a desire.
Yeah.
So that's
yeah.
why I think it acts autonomically. It's not acting out of something. It is acting what it is. So if it is perfect, and first of all, let me say, I think the best way to define what perfect is that it's no deviation from a standard, whatever an established standard is. The question is, what is that standard? And that's where we struggle. But I think the perfection means that it doesn't deviate from something that is that standard of perfection. So it's always, the perfection is always defined off of something else, if that makes sense. So if I'm looking at when I say perfect, what I mean is this thing can't be reduced to something where it can't be sufficient within itself, or it's going to have a deficit within itself.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
No, I'm following you.
Okay.
I was just, my next follow-up question would be, you said that it is, what was it? Not automatic, but
Autonomic.
Autonomic. So
yeah,
like, if it's just doing these things like off
Reflexively.
of, like, reflexively, like, could it have made the universe any other way? Because I know another issue that theists run into, or when it comes to at least classical theism, is that it's like, it seems very arbitrary. God could have created things this way or that way, and the whole fine-tuning argument falls apart. So I'm wondering if your position actually deals with that.
I think it does deal with it, but it deals with it maybe in a different way than we want it to. I think we would want it to someone to come in and say, "Oh yes, he could or he couldn't."
Mm-hmm.
But recognize what you're asking. You're saying, could God or could this thing have done it a different way? That means it would have been thinking about information, determining what was a pathway, and determining one pathway over another, and chose to do certain actions or not do certain actions. What actually we've done is we've taken this thing and we've said something that's transcendent. We've made it chronological. So I think the first thing is to ask ourselves, are we actually asking the right question of this thing? Would this thing necessarily act that way? And I think if it's transcendent, the answer is no, it wouldn't act that way. So it's incumbent upon us to go back and say, then let me try to rethink everything that I've said, which is, why didn't God do it a different way? And say, why is it that I experience it this way? Because it didn't do it a certain way by plan or determination or what have you. It just is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm experiencing is how
a projection.
I'm experiencing what it's like for me to engage with this thing. And unfortunately, when I engage with this thing, I'm experiencing these kinds of things. Why is it that I experience these things when I am dealing with something that's this way?
So would you say then you think theists are also coming at it from the wrong angle? Because it's like, the only reason why I would bring up these objections is because of what theists are telling me about their God.
Absolutely. I don't know if it's that they're coming at it the wrong way from the standpoint of they will espouse that God is transcendent. The problem is when they try to communicate how that operates, they fall into chronological language. And so, yes, I would say the answer is yes and no. From what they really hold to, no, they don't. Then I'm trying to think of which way it would be. If they really hold to what they are holding to, that you are not dealing with what really the God of the Bible. But in the way it gets communicated, I think you're ending up. I'm sorry, what they believe is the God of the Bible is transcendent and would not have this question apply. But the way they express it is chronological, and therefore that's why they run into the question why you struggle with what they're saying.
We need an
So-
updated Bible then. We need like
What's
an updated. We need an updated Bible that can
Actually,
speak
the
to us
Bible, I
now
think,
in
says
different
it.
languages.
Think about it. Think about that John 1, that John verse. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. If what it's expressing then is that if autonomically it puts in place the solution to the problem, so that it never engages a problem that isn't already solved. From God's perspective, or from this irreducible essence perspective, everything was already resolved. The problem is that chronologically, I have to go through all the stages that lead me to the solution. But if his first point of conscious awareness or reflective awareness is actually the solution to the problem, then we have to ask, okay, he actually didn't put it in place. What he's doing is actually walking with us through the chronology where we go through the imperfect moments. And then the question is, how do those imperfect moments come into place? It happens within the chronology. It doesn't happen from the essence. If it's perfect,
I get
would
that.
happen,
Yeah.
it would be derivative. It would not be constitutive. And so,
Yeah, and this is kind of like I've heard this as a similar resolution to the problem of evil, is that evil exists because it has to. It's just part of how you define goodness and virtue. Without any of its opposites, then everything loses its meaning to begin with. And because we're meaning makers, we're story makers, that's how we relate to the world, where it's a relational thing. Again, goes back to that the human brains relate to its environment in a particular way, different than, say, like a frog or a bat or a bird would. And so we may relate to the world as, oh, this is undesirable, this isn't. And that's where we derive things like ethics and morality and laws and codes and things to try to make our life better, because we have so much experience of what we don't like and what we do like. We try to create, communities and societies and families that follow particular guidelines to avoid, the things that we know we don't like. Like we don't want we don't want to be killed or raped or murdered or anything like that. And we don't want that for our loved ones either. So we make laws based on that human relationship with the unfortunate parts of reality, right?
right.
And so
Well,
does
and
that play a role in how maybe why we see the problem of evil the way we do?
I think so. And I think part of it is you have to think about it from the standpoint of, this goes back to, I think, an earlier topic that I wasn't a part of, which was free will. If there's something that's perfect and see, I fall into it automatically. It's like that acts autonomically. No, it doesn't act autonomically. But it would appear to us as being autonomic in nature. It would do it without having to determine to do it, is what I mean by that. What you would have is this perfect thing that, as a part of its reality, its existence is that there are beings that engage. I'll say it this way: they engage in something called worship, and worship would involve a choice. And so if there's choice, there's free will. So he's engaging with something that is, in his experience, in his reality, there is this thing that has a choice. And if you have a choice to do something that's your own will, worship would be a choice that would be your own will. It's inevitable that you would choose something that would be outside of his will. If not, you would have his will, not your own will. And so it's inevitable that something is going to choose eventually to do something on its own. If that was its experience, what it would be with God or with this being is that his existence would always be that it had already solved that problem before there ever was those beings. His existence is one of always solved. Ours is the experience of making the choice that ends up in the problem that then we have to come to a resolution or try to get out of it. And a transcendent being The thing that it can do is actually walk through it with you, the chronological, but it can't. It can exist with you, but it's not going to take you out of the chronological because you are chronological. I mean, that's the nature of you. So
And
I don't know if
TP
that
Seeker
makes sense.
has a,
Yeah.
I think TP Seeker, he's a Christian. And if you want to call in TP Seeker, please do. I'd love to hear your opinions. But he asked a question. He says, and I think he's a minister. And he says, well, if heaven and angels were God's first and second creations, wouldn't the war amongst angels in heaven be the origination, first problems the all-knowing God either ignored or allowed to happen?
From our perspective, chronologically, that's absolutely the case. I've written a book that's called "Created the Devil's Apprentice." That's actually about what's, how does sin, or how do choices end up going against God's will? And yes, you're exactly right. It would start with the angels chronologically, but God, if he's a transcendent God, doesn't have, well, first there were the angels and then there was mankind. And then I saw that both of them failed. And therefore I reacted to them by choosing to come to earth and die on a cross. What you would have with God is the experience of everything is resolved. Yes, within my existence, that is inclusive of me solving the problem. It's all, the first thing would be him seeing it would be like the angels and all of that were viewed from his perspective through the solution to the problem. He would always see that as, yes, the angels arose, but I'd already taken care of it, is a little what it would feel like to us. So you're exactly right. Chronologically, from the angels' perspective, from mankind's perspective, the angels rebelled, and mankind then rebelled, and then God sent his son to die on the cross. But from God's perspective, was in the beginning was the Word, the risen Christ, and all things came into being by him, even the conscious awareness of all that stuff that had happened. And even that's not completely correct, because that puts a little bit of chronology language into it as well.
I mean, I'm trying to think.
Hopefully that made sense.
I mean, I'm trying to make sense of it, because like chronologically speaking, it makes sense to think of chronological time,
absolutely,
because we have an era of time. But when we're talking about, like, when we get into like heaven, hell, angels, and demons, like, then when you try to say, well, they created, or God created them first, like, this is before there was an era of time. So, like, to me, it's like it's hard to even say they were created first in a timeless way. So it's
well, what it would be doing is pushing time backwards. It would be that we have a time as we know it as humans, but does that mean that there's no time for the angels? Could they have a time? And could there be a time beyond that? The difference is that with God, he doesn't exist in any of those timelines. We, unfortunately, when we talk about him, he's transcendent. He's outside of that, but we place him on the timeline as if, oh yeah, he created the angels first. He did this next, and he did this next. It's just broader than our timeline. We make him a super timeline holder, when in truth, he's standing outside of it. None of that governs him.
Yeah, like when you play the CD of an album, track 1 always plays first, then track 2, then track 3. But if you look at the CD, there is no real order on it. It's just all there as far as information. And when it relates to the player, when you put the relation between the code on the CD and the player causes us to experience this sequential track listing to play out in order. But looking at it from the view of God, like a God's eye view of the CD, it's just all there.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
And in fact, before it's on the CD, he's experienced.
It's there. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
almost like a writer of a book. The author of the book doesn't need to go to have experience to tell you chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. He already has the whole book. It's already in there. That's his existence.
Yeah, that's where our stuff really intersects, Greg, because like you were asking me, well, what could be more fundamental to the relations, and like I mentioned, the probability distribution, just the idea that it's all kind of, whether you want to call it something like a Platonic form or like a mind or like a, I mean, there's all kinds of analogies that
It
fit
is what it
perfectly
is.
well. It is what it
Right.
is,
It is
and
what
it
it
does
is.
what it does, and
Yeah.
it's very comparable to what we do when we go to a refrigerator and we say, do I want the chocolate milk or do I want the water today? You know, you're sitting there thinking among choices. Well, you're kind of like in superposition, you might say. Like, the possibilities are there, and then once you act on it, it all collapses into one particular reality,
Yeah.
and so, but all the possibilities are there in one mind. It's all just there.
Let me give you a crazy thought. If you know anything about Christianity, Nelly's like, it's all been crazy to me. I get you, man. I get you. It's the nature of our language of trying to explain this stuff and trying to grasp at something that's this much more than us. What's really fascinating to me is, okay, so light, Big Bang, electromagnetic. In terms of what it is, it's cosmic microwave radiation. Okay. What's interesting is like people that study like the Shroud of Turin, and I'm not saying whether or not the Shroud of Turin is right and all that. I'm not trying to go down there. What's interesting is that scientists have looked at that and said, hey, the type of energy that would have to be present to be able to put this kind of a marking on there would have been such and such big of electromagnetic kinds of energy. What's really fascinating is if you look at that and you're thinking transcendently, then when God says, let there be light, from his perspective, and he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, all things come into being by him, and the Word is the risen Jesus, tied back to creation. When he says, let there be light, he actually, from his perspective, maybe actually saying the first thing that it will feel like to you is that the resurrection happened, and you're going to think that's crazy. It's going to seem like light is out of order, that everything is out of order, because from his perspective, that light could actually be the light of the resurrection. And from a transcendent being's perspective. And it blows our mind. And we're like, no, wait, no, it has to be some kind of this or that. And it goes through this 6 days. That's the way it is. No, that's the way it appears to us. But God doesn't operate that way.
And I think the problem with a lot of this is because the Bible was written in very human terms, with chronology and all of the things that it does. Christians define it that way, historically and traditionally.
Yes.
And then, of course, the response from the unbeliever is going to be symmetrical to the way that they present the Bible and what it means. And so we've been locked into this sort of language semantic thing, whereas someone maybe like, I've spoken to Mr. Biscuit Speaks. He's what you call a Christian mystic. Yeah. So he's like kind of like on board with you. He's saying, I don't take the Bible in the way that it's things necessarily.
I think I take it ultra literally.
He would probably say the same thing. It's like, it's just that maybe the way that it's conveyed is not really the way that it actually is. It's just a way of speaking about and learn, something like that. But the problem is, and I'll let Nell kind of illustrate what the problem is with that from where an atheist may sit. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, even though, what you're saying might seem out there to me, like, I appreciate that you are looking at these things and you're thinking critically. You're not just regurgitating what you were taught. I appreciate, your honesty, your curiosity, and I wish more Christians were like that. So.
Right.
And TP Seeker asks, and this kind of gets to your point, when did God create hell? Angels fell from heaven. Did the all-knowing God send the fallen angels to hell?
Well,
he says when.
from
So,
his perspective, from even TP's perspective right now, the angels would not be sent to hell because hell has not been opened yet. So from a chronological standpoint, none of the angels would be there. From God's perspective, it would be, yes, they are already there. This whole thing is resolved. Think about all the things that you think about with Christianity, and you think, okay, this seems paradoxical. You've got a God who is all-knowing and all-powerful, and yet he asks you to pray.
right.
Why in the world? Why would we need to pray? Okay, you've got God. There's God says that what the whole Armenian versus predestination Calvinism thing. Think about that. God is a God that knows what you're going to do in advance, or he's already done it in advance, right?
Yeah, no, George Carlin has an entire bit on this. So.
Yes. Okay. Now think about it from the standpoint of, hey, wait a minute. God, why is it that some people seek God and he reveals himself to them, but other people seek him wholeheartedly and all that, and yet he doesn't reveal himself to them? Why does he remain hidden to some and not others? I mean, we could go down the list. I think the whole thing about pain and why does he allow pain and suffering? Think about every one of those questions. What do they have in common? We have a God that supposedly is transcendent, and yet he is thinking ahead or looking ahead. He's acting chronologically. I think that probably what has happened, and if you go back to Augustine, you go back to not Augustine. What's the other guy's name with an A?
Thomas Aquinas.
Aquinas, thank you, Aquinas. You go to Calvin, you go to C.S. Lewis, you go to any of them, they will say, I go through all these problems and I get to the point where I'm like, dude, God and time and all these things, it just doesn't seem to add up. I don't get it. What they've all been trying to do is answer every one of those questions themselves independently. If you have something that looks as an assumption associated with a bunch of problems, would you keep dealing with those problems, or would you look at that assumption? You'd go back upstream, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people could just say, well, it's either we don't understand, and it should be looked at a little deeper, or a lot of people would just say, well, I think maybe the Hebrews didn't think it through, and they weren't as philosophically sophisticated, and that's why it reflects that.
So, and I think, but either way, it should have us looking back upstream and saying, hey, is there something that we are describing maybe that's off there? Maybe we should relook at those kinds of things. Did the Hebrews understand it correctly? Did they? I think what's interesting, though, is I think when you look at the language, you go back to the Hebrew, you start to see more of this kind of stuff about him being transcendent and us treating him chronological is starting to come out. I think that if we were to tap the brake a little bit and say, hey, instead of us continuing to argue about these particular issues, let's go back upstream and see, is there something else that may be going on? And kind of, I'll just say it. I think that a little bit of, Scott, what you're doing and what I'm trying to do is we're going back upstream and looking at the assumptions. I think what we'll end up finding is that from a Christian's perspective, classical Christians, we've created those problems by treating our God as chronological and talking about him that way. Because an omnipotent God, omniscient God, omnibenevolent God, it doesn't make sense that he would do the things that he does within time.
I
but
mean,
if he's
look,
not chronological, Go ahead,
Neil.
I was going to ask because a deep question here, and we were talking about earlier, if whether relations are fundamental or not, but another one that we haven't really touched upon is like process philosophy. Like, would you say that the ultimate reality is either static or dynamic?
Dynamic, baby.
And I would say both. Yeah, and I would say both atheists and theists have to deal with this. Like, is for the theist, is God either static or dynamic, and for the atheist is the quantum information or the field, is it did it start out static or is it always been dynamic?
Can I say this? What's really fascinating, just hearing that question, I start to go back through my mind with Ant, autonomic omnipotence, non-sequential, and transcendent. It would look like he's dynamic, but for a transcendent God, where past, present, and future are all now.
Yeah.
For him, it's static. For us, looking at him, it's dynamic. And I think that's
non-dualism. That's non-dualism. That's exactly what non-dualism is saying, is that it all depends on your perspective. Like from one perspective, everything is constantly changing in motion and evolving. And then from another higher perspective, things just are. It just is what it is, and as one reality. Yeah. So I accept. But
and both realities are real.
Right. That's what I'm trying to say, is that, you know, from my view, and I know it's very Eastern religious sounding or whatever, but I think there's a lot of truth to that. Even, and the reason I say that is because it's meeting the four virtues of my metaphysic. You know, mainly that it's internally and externally consistent. That in not only does it have explanatory power, is kind of parsimonious, but it also is consistent with science, with philosophy, with psychology, with spirituality, even the Bible. Like you're saying, there's ways to look at it that makes it still. So it's like when you have such convergence on one concept that's very simple like that,
exactly,
it's not complicated at all, it's just saying a very simple statement.
Yeah.
Then,
and it's basically us saying, instead of, hey, let's look at what everyone else has always said, and they always come out at the end and say, hey, we have these problems, we don't know how to address them, I guess we'll figure them out someday. Maybe it's that we really needed to look back upstream and challenge some of those assumptions. And maybe when we challenge those assumptions, we see that there's something else maybe going on. That's the thing that I find fascinating, Scott. And just to be, you know, I don't know how many viewers are out there or whatever. This is not something like we've been talking about this for a long period of time. This is like over the last 2 or 3 days that we've started noticing, wait a minute, this stuff seems to be converging. And I think, and we're coming at it from different directions and have different terms sometimes, and we have to work through the problems of our vocabulary together. But what is fascinating, I think, is that it's possible that we may end up at a place where we think we know how this thing might necessarily work. What we don't know is this thing impersonal or personal, and we may not ever, we're not probably never going to know that. And I think what we're going to have, you end up in a place is, which way am I going to believe? And really, you can be convinced that both are really highly possible. It's not, and I think because you're in that position, it's almost like we were talking about, can you choose to believe something, or are you just convinced of it? What if you're convinced of multiple things and they're within spitting distance of each other, and you're like, okay, I'm going to do something. I'm going to take an action. I'm going to hold to something. I think you end up choosing a belief. And look, you choose it. And
well, yeah. And the things that I will tell you out of my mouth, intellectually, and that I don't really believe, but I'll say them because I believe them intellectually, but I don't really believe them in action, because my actions betray the things that I talk about. And so then it opens up the question, well, what is it that you really believe? And so it kind of creates like a little conundrum. Like, you know, I oftentimes say that, oh yeah, nature has no mind. It doesn't care about us. It doesn't give a shit one way or the other. But then why is it that I always feel like, you know, I have to be careful with, I have to respect, like the world, like there's some sort of, like I take it personal, like, damn it, why is, you know, I'm having a bad day at work or something or somewhere. It's like the universe is against me today. It's like, you really believe that. I mean, in the moment, really feel that way. And so you wonder, well, what do I really believe? Because if I really believe what I talk about all the time, then how is it that I catch myself saying these stupid things? Like we were talking earlier about free will. Like I'll sit there and tell you, yeah, I don't believe in absolute free will. and I can say that confidently. But then every day I'm looking both sides of the road before I decide to cross it. I'm doing all the things that someone who believes their choices and things are absolutely means. What am I saying, Greg? And am I a liar to myself, or what's really going on here?
I think what you are is a chronological being who has to make those choices in a thing that actually is transcendent, a transcendent reality, and it's going to look that way. It just occurred to me, you know, when Joel was asking me that question previously about what was he was asking me something about how you can have this kind of a God that's transcendent and yet he's not. How can he be personal? Remember what we just said, that the chronological reality is real. It's just that there's also a deeper reality too. And so God is, from in my dealings with it, it is that Jesus comes to earth and dies and pays the penalty for my sin. He does it in a personal way. He sees me and he loves me and he wants to do this and all that, but yet transcendently it would be something different. He is absolutely personal to me, and within himself, that is his ultimate reality. It's just that he experiences it in a way that we would look at and say doesn't look personal, but how it actually operates to me is actually personal. It's fascinating. We could go on for hours, really, talking about.
Oh yeah. I love these conversations, and it lets me know something, because I was watching some videos this morning, and one famous philosopher is quoted as saying that you are a mature, well thought out logician and philosopher when you find that you're no longer arguing with as many people as you used to. But you're trying to find commonality with everybody. So that's a good thing, I think.
Hey, hello.
Hey.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Is my audio okay?
It is.
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, good. Well, thanks for having me. I just thought I'd call in. I caught like 5 minutes of the stream when I stumbled across it. A very interesting conversation between you. So I was like, oh, I'll jump in.
Thank you.
No, but thanks for having me.
You bet.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts so far, what you heard?
To be honest with you, I was just taking it all in. Like, if you want to ask me anything, like, feel free.
Let's see. I mean, would you agree with what with Greg and Scott have been saying, with like, it can, like, God can be both static and dynamic, or do you think that's a logical contradiction? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah. So for me, I believe God is multifaceted, and we can't truly grasp or even really comprehend what he is truly. So yeah, I could say he could be static, but also dynamic as well, because, as they say, he is God, but he is everything as well. You know what I mean?
Okay, so I mean, do you consider yourself a theist?
For me, I'm a Catholic.
Okay, a Catholic. I was a former Catholic.
Yeah, I think.
We lost your sound a little bit there, Scott.
Yeah, I think me and Bear spoke long time ago.
Yeah. Hey.
I think we did, maybe.
Yep.
Hey, Scott, I got about 5 more minutes
familiar.
till I need to go.
Oh, okay, sure, no problem, man.
I just thought I'd throw it out there and say if anyone had like one more question they wanted to ask me before I took off, I'd be certainly open to it.
Yeah, Exa Music asks, God is a he? How did we determine its gender?
There's a part of me that, there's a part of me that says that it probably goes back in some ways to language, from the standpoint of, when we used to describe things and we didn't know what they were, we always said he. There's a part of me that says, I guess I don't really care about that question. I don't think is as important as, the nature of him from a reality standpoint, and what does he want to do in terms of relating to me. It's not that I'm saying that that's not important or whatever. It may be highly important to you. It's just one of those things that I look at and say, I guess in the Bible, he described himself that way, but since people wrote it, then, it also could be that was just the way they were using their language. It could be highly important to him, but it doesn't seem to be, from what I can see. It's probably more important to us as people than it is to him. And I think what he probably spends most of his time doing is trying to say, hey, look, you're in a position where you're not compatible or perfectly aligned with what I am in essence. And if something's imperfect and there's something that is perfect and they're incompatible, how do we get to a point of compatibility? Is I think where God spends most of his time in talking about things.
And I think,
and I hope that's not,
also,
I'm not trying to downplay your question. It's just not one that I've spent a lot of time on because of that.
Yeah. And I think that in Hebrew grammar, words like Elohim are grammatically masculine, just in biblical Hebrew, from what I understand. So, the Hebrew speakers would naturally refer to Elohim or Yahweh as male or a he. And it really has to do with the role that he plays. And, and if you think about the culture, Mideastern cultures, it was very patriarchal.
Yeah.
And so you would want your God to be the ultimate patriarch. You wouldn't want him to be subservient or, in some way looked at as weak, like the weaker vessel or whatever.
Right.
That's why they got rid of, Yahweh had a wife at one time, Ashtoreth. And eventually all her trees and statues they made the political decision that should be removed from the first temple. Definitely not be in the second temple rebuilding. And so it became a political, politics. There wasn't like a state separation from religion and state back then, obviously, right? So it was all sort of wrapped up as one thing. And so I think that decision became where Elohim or Yahweh, by the time the second temple was built, it was Yahweh. Elohim kind of fell out of.
So
there's a part of me that said that in some ways the he, she thing on that would be kind of like a chronological thing versus a transcendent thing. It probably matters more to us than it does to something that's transcendent.
Well, so I think a more
spiritual
helpful question then would be, is it still useful to describe the transcendent being as a he, if it is, beyond our concepts of gender and sex?
Yeah. I would say if it takes us away from talking about what God's seemingly trying to communicate to us, which is that we have a problem that he's trying to resolve and show us a remedy for it. If it takes us away from talking about that, since that was really his priority, then yes, it's a problem for sure. Because it really is getting us going down a pathway that probably he would say, even if I resolve that for you, you could still end up in hell, and I don't want you to end up there. So let's go deal with the other stuff. If that makes sense?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So, and the motivation for a lot of unbelievers, you have a lot of people that want to challenge certain views. And what they do, that there's all kinds of assumptions that go into their questions. For one thing, they're assuming they forget that our modern sensitivities regarding roles are changing, like men, women, but what we forget is it wasn't always that way. And so we kind of make this fallacy called presentism, where we sort of project our present ideas about morality and ethics onto language that we no longer see as politically correct, so to speak. Yeah. And so by calling God a he, by today's standards, that might be looked at as sexist, and so they say, see, God knew he was being sexist, but you're a sexist too, because you go along with God being a he, a patriarch, and so they kind of like ask that question to sort of make a point that why are you trying to promote your sexism onto your religion, and God, that just disproves your religion, that it's sexist or it's evil.
Yeah.
And so
a little bit
that's
of
the
motivation.
spirit behind those questions.
No, I understand what you're saying, Scott. It can be a loaded question, but I do think it's like if you come from a genuine place, I think you can ask it in a way like I was trying to get at, of like if God is transcendent and is beyond our understanding of sex and gender, then I think you can be like, well, why call him he?
Yeah. I like I said, it's not that it's not a valid question. It's just probably not one I've dealt with, to be honest with you. I haven't thought a ton
it's kind of a low bar kind of.
Scott, because I've got to go. Are we continuing this discussion tomorrow? Were we going to do something at 2:30?
Yeah, we can do it tomorrow. Yeah, sure. Yeah, we're gonna get in more depth, me and you.
Because there may be people that are sitting there saying, I'm enjoying this conversation. I'd like to go deeper into it. And if you're wanting to have a second shot at it, I think we're going to kind of pick it up or kind of talk about it.
We're picking up tomorrow, 12 o'clock, man. Huh? So all you guys tune in, man. Me and Greg are gonna do a conversation on a lot of this stuff. So yeah.
You mean you're not going to destroy Greg?
No. I wish somebody like Darth Dawkins or somebody would call in. That's kind of the spicy debates I want, but no, not with someone like Greg. He's very respectful and
I look forward to it, Greg, and I actually agree. Even though I'd say it's a valid question, it's not really a deep question, and I wouldn't really focus on it either. The whole gender thing,
but it is an interesting question. I mean,
it is. Yeah.
There are some times when questions are just fun to ask, and we kind of want to know. We're inquisitive. But it's not going to change. We all recognize it's probably not going to change our lives in eternity and all that. But sometimes we ask those questions just because we want to know. And that's okay too. So, well, thanks, guys. I appreciate it, Scott. Thank you. And Nelly, nice to meet you. Baranowski. Did I say it right?
Oh, it's a mouthful. You can just say Bear.
Bear. Thank you.
Take care, Greg.
Appreciate you jumping on. Take care.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Yeah, let me remove him. There we go. Yeah, man. So I'm gonna go on for just a few more minutes. I gotta roll here soon. But let's look at what X Music is talking about. Snake in the garden was just a snake, became something more much later than it was written. Yeah. Christianity made the snake the devil, right? Old Testament talks about God's counsel and sons of God in many places. English translators use angel, couldn't accept many gods. Yeah, I guess so, because that would be polytheism.
Yeah.
But a lot of Christians say that no, there's actually many gods. Even God said, do not put other gods before me. So he was acknowledging the fact that there were other gods, and they come in form. Some people make themselves God. But yeah, it's so I'm gonna get on out, man. I just realized it's past 1:30, so I gotta get out. Shit.
Oh, no worries. Thanks for having me, and even though it was short, thank you. But take care, guys.
You too.
Yep. All right, man. Thanks you guys for coming through. Like and subscribe. If you're new to the channel, please do me that big solid, man. I'm trying to get people to grow the channel. And come through tomorrow, I think at noon, we're going to have that conversation, get more in depth about the notion of God and so forth. And thanks everybody for the participation. I really appreciate that. And we will check you out tomorrow. Peace.